Before this video starts, I just want to give a massive shout out to all my channel members. If you want to receive a shout out, then become a channel member today and you'll be shown on screen like all these other channel members here. Anyways, enjoy the video. The Burgle Cats has a long history of collabing with other media properties, from mobile games to various anime to even transit lines, but with so many collabs in the game, and with people enjoying so many different properties, the favorite collabs of any individual collab will always be different. While some common collabs may float around someone's top 10 or even top 5, someone's favorite is bound to be different from someone else's. Attempting to rank an individual collab subjectively is rather easy. Trying to rank them all subjectively is a whole beast in its own. However, I decide to rank these collabs not as a subjective piece, but rather to rank them objectively. How will I be doing this? You might think it's based on how big of a piece of media is, or who the best units in a collab are, but that's not the metric I'm going with. What I've decided to do is scan through every single collab this game has ever had and rank them based on the sheer volume of content that they've added. In order for a collab to be considered on this list, the collab must have introduced a unit that is unique to said collab, so things like the Festa Battle collab, which didn't add anything to the Burgle Cats and only added content for that game, or the MattShea collab with Capsule Cat won't count, as Capsule Cat is a Burgle Cats original unit. Each collab will be ranked with 6 different measures of content that each collab adds. These being units added, how many true forms a collab has, how many of the true forms have talents, how many enemies a collab adds, and how many unique stages a collab has, as well as any auxiliary factors a collab has. Everything except stages added gives 1 point, while stages give 0.25 points. Another thing is that for gauntlet stages, only one unique instance of a stage will count in this scoring. Also, additional star difficulties will not be counted for scoring the stages. If a collab was exclusive to a specific version or specific versions, I'll leave a little text box at the bottom right corner for those who may have not heard of some of these collabs. A lot of the discussion with most collabs is just going to focus on the units, but if there's any notable stages and for the higher scoring collabs, enemies present, then I'll discuss them as well. But sections after certain blocks will just go over the enemies and batches, who will always be discussed with 100% stats, but notable magnified stats may be mentioned as well. I suppose with all this said, we have a large amount of collabs to cover, 58 of them in fact, so this video may feel a little bit faster paced than some of my usual stuff, so let's not waste any more time and dive straight into it. For the weakest collabs, we have a 3-way tie between Honey Toast Cafe Akihabara, Cuckoo Crew 12, and the tutorial collabs. All of them scored with just one singular point, for adding a single unit each. The Honey Toast Cafe unit added was Honeyto-kun, the mascot of the cafe who was a honey toast, a staple menu item, and a weaker rover cat. Cuckoo Crew 12 is a famous Korean YouTube troupe, with their dog Tofu being added in their evolved form, but their battlefield performance is less than stellar. Last is Tutorial Cat, a unit based on a comedy duo with the same name, but on the battlefield, this duo does not achieve much. The unit is the only thing these collabs offer. No extra stages, enemies, or anything of the sort. Then to celebrate the 7th anniversary of the Tokyo Skytree, Japan's tallest freestanding structure and the 2nd tallest in the world, adds a brand new unit in Sorakara, the mascot of the Skytree, and 3 stages. The most notable thing about Sorakara is at the time, she was only one of 5 units to have a Savage Blow, with the others being 2 other collab units, Kahime and Lasvos, who was added in the same update. On the battlefield, Sorakara is mainly useful as extra early game damage. Y Mobile is a Japanese mobile operating network, with their collab adding 2 stages and their mascot serving as both an enemy and a unit. Futinyan himself, however, is an extremely weak anti-red who even faces competition with Axe Cat of all units. Perhaps the most interesting part of this collab is that there's data that exists for a 3rd stage to be implemented but was left unfinished, so there's just a simple graphic for it. Then we have a 2-way tie with Capbusters and MattShea Island Tour. Capbusters is an RPG game, and the collab adds 3 stages, with both Neko Hakase serving as an enemy and an unlockable unit. This unit can help assist Jurassic Cat in the early game, but has nothing else outside of this use. The MattShea Island Tour collab is a collab with the line sticker brand named MattShea Meow as a part of the Taiwan Cultural Expo in 2019, and this collab features the mascot as both a unit and an enemy. This unit is like if Ro had no health and single target, but in exchange had guaranteed weaken chance with over 100% uptime. While useful in the early game when you lack options, they lose almost all relevance once Thaumaturge is unlocked, though this unit is a solid early Labyrinth unit due to their 100% weaken chance. Next is a 3-way tie between Dot Heroes, Nazusagi, and Pen Pineapple Apple Pen. For those that don't know what Pen Pineapple Apple Pen was, it's a famous comedical song by Pikotaro, making a humorous song where he takes an apple and a pineapple, puts a pen through each, and describes his creation as the Pen Pineapple Apple Pen. What's interesting is while the Pen Pineapple Apple Pen collab only has one stage compared to the 5 that exist with the other 2 collabs, this collab makes up for the missing point by having a secondary unit in CPAC, or Cat Pineapple Apple Cat. As a unit, however, Pikotaro is a rather sluggish red freezer and only has a 30% chance to do so, and with a cooldown of 31 seconds, it's very difficult to use him. CPAC is another early game anti-red that faces competition with Axe Cat. While this isn't a part of the official scoring, I want to give a special mention to the CPAC video Pikotaro did for this collab. It is what you think it would be like. Dot Heroes is an action-adventure game developed by Silicon Studio and From Software. 3D Cat is very similar in vein with Cat Burger in the fact that it's a clone of the basic cat, and the enemy is the titular Dot Hero, who's a red enemy. The Nazusagi collab is with the manga character of the same name. The unit, however, despite dealing massive damage against black enemies, has such poor stats that most other options are preferable. The backgrounds that were used for this collab stages would actually get reused, being used in the stages Otherworld Forest, Sinister Wasteland, and the Otherworld Meadow. These stages being the final stages needed before you can access the Wicked Cat stages. For our first enemy batch discussion, not much is of note. Futinyan is just a weaker hippo, MattShea Cat and Cat Tour Group are weak enemies who can weaken units for 5 seconds. Neko Hakase, despite being slightly tanky, has single target, so not even their 20% crit chance will do anything. Dot Hero is somewhat bulky, and has a 50% chance to knock back units. They are a red enemy. Nazusagi is a black enemy with a fairly decent 330 range, but stackable units like Paris Cat can take quick care of them. Last for this batch is Pikotaro, who is a metal enemy capable of one-shotting most units and with a wild 500 range. It should be noted that he is the only enemy present in his stage, however, so you can easily rush him down with most units. Our next collab is actually a solo, not being tied with anyone else. This being with Mentori, a lined sticker brand. This collab contains 2 units, the titular Mentori and his younger sister, Imoto. Mentori is simply a weak floating tank that doesn't do much, and Imoto is in a very similar boat as Neko Hakase from earlier, having use early game but is usually just user rank food. A 2-way tie between Betokuma and the YouTuber Chocolate. Betokuma is a line sticker brand, and this collab has 2 units, the titular bear and a cat version called Nekokuma. Both units are essentially the same, just with different targets. While Betokuma targets aliens, Nekokuma targets black enemies. They both cost 150 to send out and have a 5% chance to knock back their targets. The Chocolate collab is with the YouTuber of the same name, with a unit, an enemy, and the first collab on this list to have a true form. As for Chocolate, his performance, at least compared to everything else seen so far, is pretty impressive, though that is saying something when this unit starts to fall off once Bomber Cat becomes available, especially since knockback isn't that great against black enemies. Our next set of collabs that tie is with the Japanese Self-Defense Forces, or the JSDF, and Godzilla. Now that's funny that these 2 sworn enemies would share the same spot on this list. The JSDF has a Doge and a Type 10 tank as an enemy, and a cat in one as well. This is also the first collab on the list to have 8 stages total. The Godzilla collab stars the titular King of the Monsters as he appeared in Shin Godzilla, the movie that re-sparked the Godzilla flame in Japan back in 2016. This collab has 1 unit, being a cat wearing both a grayscale Shin Godzilla suit, giving him a design that resembles the more grayish Godzillas of the past, and a Shin Godzilla suit. Godzilla Cat themselves, however, is a fairly underwhelming mid-range anti-black attacker, especially thanks to their single target. This collab, while only has 4 stages, is the first one to gain an auxiliary point as it has a remixed version of the Godzilla theme that's used for each of the stages. Perhaps the last notable thing about this collab is the stage God of Destruction, a merciless ranked stage which features a Shin Godzilla that deals a base 1.2 million damage, giving them the highest damage out of any collab enemy. The enemy also has Base Destroyer, multiplying this damage to 4.8 million, and at max, you have 22 seconds to beat the stage. Granted, Shin Godzilla only has 130,000 health in this stage, so Bahamut and Bullet Train can easily kill the King of the Monsters. A 4-way tie between Final Boss Strikes, Hikakin, Dragon League, and Hiroshi Mihara. Final Boss Strikes is a collab with singer and actress Shachiko Kobayashi, whose stages give Cabaret Cat, who then becomes Mega Cat, who also has a true form called Mega Cat EX. This collab runs for 1 day a year. In the Japanese version, it's from December 31st to January 1st, and in the English version, it runs from January 31st to February 1st. This collab has an auxiliary point for having Cabaret Cat be found in the Battle Cats pop. However, in this game, they're called Singer Cat. Both the Hikakin and Hiroshi Mihara collabs are with different YouTubers. While there isn't anything notable about Hiroshi Mihara's collab besides being an unstackable but okay anti-floating, Hikakin's unit is the only unit whose true form changes absolutely nothing about them in the entire game, and being only an aesthetic change. Last is with Dragon League, which is an RPG game published by Asobism. This collab contains 2 units, Nubobo, a unit who's a weaker artist cat, and an extremely unimpressive anti-black unit in the form of a swordsman and a witch. Depending on the form, they're either a melee or a ranged unit. For our second enemy batch, most enemies aren't all of that note. Mentori is a weak, traitless enemy, same goes with Betakuma. Chocolate Cat, despite being an awakening boss, has rather weak stats, though they do have a 50% chance to knock back units. Type 10 is just a tank, however, this enemy was completely replaced by a metal variant that has a doge inside it. The most notable thing is that it has Base Destroyer. At their strongest, they can deal 32,000 damage to bases. Hiroshi Mihara is a slightly toned down version of Pikataro, having less health and has a shorter range, but still deals 99,000 damage and is a metal enemy. Idol Mihara is a traitless enemy that has a 50% chance to freeze units for 3 seconds, but just like Chocolate Cat, they're rather weak for an awakening enemy. Dragon League Swordsman and Witch are melee and ranged black enemies respectively. Even at their strongest, they don't do all that much, with units like Dragon taking easy care of them. Hikakin has range but is easily beatable. Once again, Byukyakin is rather weak for an awakening enemy, but will always freeze units for 1.5 seconds. Shin Godzilla as an enemy has a really large blind spot, but in return can nuke most units from a distance, to the point where he can easily nuke your base in one go. As mentioned earlier, he is the collab enemy with the highest attack stat in the entire game post magnifications, where at peak strength he deals 1.2 million damage, or 4.8 million damage against bases. The most notable enemies are Mega Cat and Mega Cat EX. Both are metal enemies that nuke the battlefield, but Mega Cat EX is thrice as tanky and attacks more often with slightly higher range, although Mega Cat has been spotted in several stages outside of the collab stages. Nissan UFO is a company that sells yakisoba noodles whose containers appear like the classic flying saucer that is used to depict UFOs. One of the units added is a variant of UFO Cat who focuses on breaking barriers and acting as a UFO who deals more damage per hit instead of a stackable DPS unit, and thus is better at dealing with tankier enemies that UFO can't handle. The other is a variant of Chimera, while useful in the early game, gets left behind due to having very low starting stats. Another two-way tie between the Neo Mushroom Garden and Yakuza Apocalypse collabs. While Neo Mushroom Garden gets most of their points for having a lot of units, Yakuza Apocalypse has multiple enemies and 10 stages tied to the collab. Neo Mushroom Garden is a harvesting game, and this collab contains 4 distinct fungal units, most of which are meat shield based units. You have Fungi, Tanky, and Fortressi all being melee based units, while White Cat has range in their evolved form. The most notable thing about this collab is that this is the first collab to use the login stamp system. Yakuza Apocalypse is a fantasy Yakuza vampire film, which tells the tale of a benevolent Yakuza boss who, while being immune to most injuries, must drink blood in order to keep himself alive. The unit from this collab is a variant of both the Basic Cat and Titan Cat. This is one of those units where the first form will always be better to use. Another tie between 2 collabs, more likely than you think. We have both Google Android and the Gaussian Rapid Transit Line. The Gaussian Rapid Transit Line, or the KRT, is a 3-way collab, also featuring the Majimiao Line sticker brand. The KRT is a metro system that's in the city of Kaohsiung, the main international port of Taiwan, with over 67% of goods coming in and out of the country flowing through here. The unit added is Happy, the mascot used for the KRT collab. This unit is best described as a bullet train without the damage and trades basically all of their survivability to knock back red and black enemies. The true form adds the angel targeting. Google Android is a collab that features the titular mascot of the Android OS, as Google was the company which developed the most popular version of Android. Spring Droid, the unit added however, is just the weaker Noodle Cats, and those guys already have a not so stellar performance on the battlefield. Perhaps the most notable thing about this collab is that Droid Cat was the very first unit outside of the basic cat and the special purchasable units to receive a true form all the way back in version 3.5. For a collab that doesn't tie with anyone else, we have Line Pokopon, another brand of Line sticker brand. This collab features 3 characters, consisting of Pokota, a very frail and weak rabbit, Ovis, a sheep with a slightly better fate as a red tanker but falters to the likes of Maximum the Fighter and Ro, as well as Coco, a unit who has over 200% uptime with their weaken against black, but it's only useful as an early game CC unit and early game labyrinth fodder. The Gaoshan Rapid Transit line returns, however this time comes along the KRT girls, 4 mascots for the Gaoshan Metro. The 4 mascots are Sora, who serves as a station worker at Yangqingpu Station, Amelia, who works as a train driver, Anne, a train mechanic, and Nana, who is a Vocaloid train announcer. Sora's role in this game is a red freezer, though iCat doesn't give her much usability, especially due to her single target and poor uptime. Nana is basically Rodeo with shorter range, with guaranteed procs, even if the uptime isn't the strongest, and mini waves, but just like most black crowd control units, they tend to fall victim to Bomber Cat's strength, though her guaranteed procs does give her good usage in the early game labyrinth. The last 2 units, Amelia and Anne, work a lot like Sora, guaranteed freeze procs but with very poor uptime and single target. The most you can get out of Amelia is against Borafem, and Anne's very low freeze uptime causes her to get outshone by Hoopmaster in almost every single way. Yoroi Gigigi no Kitaru, Yokai Dozabata Daisensu, or Kitaru for short, is a tower defense game based on Gigigi no Kitaru made for their 50th anniversary and was developed by both Ponos and DNA. It's no longer able to be downloaded, but the game played very similarly to the Battle Cats. This collab introduces 3 units, who all share one rather absurd similarity. Despite being rare units, all of their cooldowns are over a minute long. Kitaru will mainly see use in EOC outbreaks, same goes with Medema Oyaji. Neko Musume is probably meant to be a tank-like unit, but seeing as her overall health isn't exactly the highest, and along with that long cooldown and no defensive abilities just makes her a worse Titan Cat. Another collab that shares the same spot as Kitaru is Crash Fever, an RPG puzzle game. This collab features 3 units, these being Happy 100, Belial, and the Uber Mobius. While the former 2 don't really do much, seeing as Happy 100 has no stats, and Belial is a rather weak super rare attacker, Mobius is a pretty serviceable anti-red Uber, with solid damage output and knockback to keep enemies away. Shin Japan Heroes Universe is a 4-way collab with Kamen Rider, Ultraman, Neo Genesis Evangelion, and Godzilla. All 4 units that were added share both the massive damage and resistance abilities, as well as single target. Kamen Rider targets red, Godzilla targets floating, Unit 01 targets angel, and Ultraman targets black. Kamen Rider, however, is unique in the fact that they have LD, and Godzilla has multi-hit. However, their single target does hold them back for being truly solid units in the long run, though they do have a solid use case for a good chunk of stories of legend, and are extremely solid units for early game labyrinth. This batch of enemies is where things pick up a little. Yakisoba UFO is a low-range floating attacker, but at peak strength, they have 600,000 HP and deal 30,000 damage. Yakisoba Face is a variant with 500 range and is relatively weak in initial appearances, but at peak strength, they have 266,000 HP and deal 15,000 damage. They also warp units by 1,000 range for 0.33 seconds. Fungi is a weak peon enemy. Mobcat is like Killer Cat, except traitless and trades speed for health and range. Yakuza Vampire is a slightly bulky enemy with 40,000 HP, though at peak strength has 200,000 HP. They also have a 20% chance to freeze units for 3 seconds. Happy is an enemy that's fast and bulky but deals very little damage, but will consistently push your units back. Happy and Magicat are very similar, except now they slow units for 5 seconds. Sakura Android is the first fairly deadly enemy with 400,000 health and 11,000 damage with 440 range. At peak strength, they have 1.6 million health and deal 44,000 damage. They don't attack often, so opportunities to strike back are present. While all of the Line Pokopon enemies have somewhat deadly stats, they only have these stats at their stronger showings. Pokota in their strongest showing has 64,000 HP and deals 10,000 damage. Ovis has 200,000 HP and deals 3,000 damage. Last is Coco, who has 120,000 HP and deals 10,000 damage while also weakening units for 3.3 seconds. Once again, the KRT girls mostly appear with weaker magnifications, but they do become somewhat strong later on. At peak strength, Nana has 120,000 HP and deals 5,000 damage, but will slow your units for 1.67 seconds and has a level 3 mini wave. Her strongest appearance is at 200%. Emilia and Doge have 135,000 HP and deal 7,500 damage while being able to freeze all units for 1.67 seconds. Gitaru is a fairly weak enemy, but their strongest appearance is at 900% magnification. He can slow units for 2 seconds. Neko Musume knocks back units and also has 900% mags in their strongest showing. Midama Oyaji weakens all units for 2 seconds and 900% is their strongest showing. Belial is a speedy attacker who has solid range and strengthens at half health. With his max magnification, his strengthened damage can go up to 294,000 damage. Mobius is a very high range floating enemy with 400,000 HP and deals 13,000 damage, but attacks very infrequently. Happy 100 is just a generic mid-range floating enemy. Monster Hunter, the game series that influenced the general design philosophy of behemoth enemies, did a collab with the Burgle Cats a long time ago. Granted, it was only with the Japanese version. Specifically, they were collabing with Monster Hunter, Big Game Hunting Quest. Felying Melnyinx, Shira Kirin, Rathalos, and Rathian, as well as a Kirin Cat are added to this collab. Felying targets black and with Melnyinx swaps to red targeting. However, their low range and single target doesn't give them many opportunities to weaken the right enemy, especially with the 30% chance to do so. Shirya has the stats of a super rare while being a special unit. She is strong against floating, however, her extremely long cooldown doesn't give her many places to be used outside of 4-star stages. Both Rathalos and Rathian are backliner units, but Rathalos' sluggish attack rate makes him a worse off Bahamut, only having use if you lack better options. Rathian fares slightly better, and just so happens to have a higher damage and faster attack frequency. However, they trade Rathalos' 405 range for a 320 range, and with a 30% chance to weaken everything, they're a more accessible but much weaker Urs, as they also could be used in 4-star stages. Last is Kirin Cat, who may resist floating. It should just be treated as if the ability doesn't exist, and really should only be used in 4-star stages due to it being a lot faster than most other meat shield options, and the second form is a giraffe clone that isn't doing any sort of floating tanking outside of the early game. This collab gains 2 auxiliary points, as this collab has a unique gacha item that is needed to acquire most of the units in the collab, and the fact that the units have a unique card spawning animation that isn't seen on any other units. Now for a different transit line, we have Get On Kyoto Subway. This collab, as it would suggest, would be a collab with the Kyoto Municipal Subway. This collab introduces 4 units: Rei Uzumasa, Misa Ono, Moe Uzumasa, and Saki Matsuga. Rei Uzumasa has a 100% chance to crit, allowing her to be similar to Sunny Neneko in many aspects, though her low damage per hit does cause her to be shaky against stronger metals. Misa Ono has a 100% chance to weaken floating enemies for 6.67 seconds or 8 seconds with treasures. Useful for the early game when you may lack proper floating counters, but once you start getting some, her value drops quite a bit. Same with Saki Matsuga, except she targets red and weakens for 5 seconds or 6 seconds with treasures. Good for when you lack proper counters, but once you start getting proper red counters, her usage will fall off quite hard. The main thing that holds these two back is their rather long cooldowns of nearly 20 seconds. Moe Uzumasa is a simple but extremely weak LD attacker. From riding the trains to riding horseback is the Japan Racing Association collab. 3 of the basic cats get ready to run on the racetrack, these being Giraffe, Dragon, and Burgle Cat. First is Giraffe Modoki. This giraffe is both strong against red and freeze immune. However, this unit as a giraffe variant is wholly reliant on plus levels, but even at level 1 plus 30, they're wholly outmatched by a level 5 crazed giraffe in terms of pure strength. Against red enemies, you only need a level 13 crazed giraffe to surpass it in damage, and level 18 to surpass it in health. Next is Catnip Tricky, who again suffers the same fate as Giraffe by being way too weak even at max level for any use. Their literal P health makes their knockback immunity not do anything, as most enemies can just sneeze on it and deliver a natural knockback. Now last but easily the strongest is Catnip Dragon. While at max strength, they're only the equivalent to a level 21 dragon, what makes them somewhat solid is their massive damage against black enemies. This massive boost in damage ends up making the equivalent to a level 20 plus 88 king dragon in terms of damage output, but their single target can limit their use to tankier black enemies, and they don't get a health boost, meaning they're extremely frail with only 14,000 HP. This collab had gotten 2 auxiliary points, one for gaining a unique special gacha requiring the use of golden carrots, and the fact that all 3 units give a speed up medium combo. Now we have made it to the top 26 collabs, and this one might leave you a little bit chiseled. Shakurao Planet, the collab that gave us the absolute specimens of Shakurao Macho Cat, Doge, Gory, and The Face. Chaparral Planet is a toy brand known for their figures having extremely chiseled chins, such as the featured panda, lion, and tiger. This was the first time a collab in the game required real money to acquire a unit in the game, as the titular panda, lion, and tiger were all locked behind this. The lion can wave and crit, but the chances of either happening are low, let alone both activating at once. The panda is a solid early game Z killer, but their damage output isn't enough in the late game, and the tiger's barrier break chance is alright, but their melee range doesn't give them many chances to break barriers. As for Chaparral Macho Cat, they're effectively a slower Macho Cat who costs slightly more, so they may not even be preferable to units like Coin Cat and Cat Burger. Then we have the Nibaru-kun and Nyanpazuru collab. Nibaru-kun is an unofficial mascot of the Ibaraki prefecture, and Nyanpazuru, as the name would suggest, is a puzzle game. Nibaru-kun is like most collab units, fine early game but falls off hard once you get the usual true forms and non-collab units. This unit has a 30% chance to slow floating enemies. As for the Nyanpazuru units, there are 4 of them. Nyanmusu is not that great of an anti-red freezer, but their high range and fine damage stat allows him to get some value in 4-star stages. Pochi, like most collab critters, has way too low of a crit chance to ever crit, with only a 2% chance to do so. Kuromi attempts to be an anti-black meat shield and attacker. However, their health is way too low for them to properly fulfill this role. Their 5.2 second cooldown and 480 cost does not help them out either. Last is Setsuko, who unfortunately also has rather poor stats and a very redundant ability of having a 30% chance to knock back red enemies, a role much better suited to Dread Pirate Catly, even if Setsuko has area attack. Just like with the Monster Hunter collab, this collab has a special gacha that gives you the units from the collab, which gives them their auxiliary point. Then we have Tower of Saviors, a puzzle mobile game, which is the 3rd most recent collab to be run for the first time as of this video. This collab includes 5 units, including an Uber and an in-app purchase unit. Felix, like many 100% crit units, has a damage stat and a very long TBA that doesn't allow them to be used anywhere outside of niche situations, like being a faster Soba and facing danger for those who don't have Sunya Neko. Dotty Cat, the in-app purchase unit, is just the worst ramen in every way and is only worth for collection purposes. Mad Hat is basically Thaumaturge, but they can only target floating and need treasures to reach over 100% uptime. At least in the early game, it can make enemies like Bun Bun and Shy Boy easier to deal with. Maliana Cat is a fairly solid anti-zombie crowd controller, acting as a higher range, slower attacking Weed Whacker who has a higher chance to freeze. Last is Voluptuous Peony Daji, a solid backliner that can make dealing with floating and angel enemies an easier ordeal, on top of their 2-second slow for slight relief. This collab receives 2 auxiliary points for having 2 unique music tracks for the collab. For another 3-way collab is with Dragon Poker, a real-time card battling game, and Million Arthur, a card battle RPG game. Both of these collabs bring 4 units, 2 Ubers, 2 special units. Clone L is just a worse Axe Cat, but at least Red Marin can be a suitable cat replacement in 4-star stages, like Coin and Catburger are. As for the Ubers, Triple S Monkey King is effectively the same as Greater Demon Cat, sharing almost the exact same stats across the board, only having the smallest of differences that don't matter in the end. Nimue, the other Uber from the collab, also shares most of her attributes with another Uber. This time, they share almost every single stat with Thundia's second form, including her massive damage. The small differences that exist between the two of them, like Triple S Monkey King, are negligible considering the fact that there's only a 305 difference in health and a 255 difference in attack. What's interesting is that the Ubers have a range that isn't wholly divisible by 5 or 10, as Monkey King has 177 range and Nimue has 408 range. Up next is Eurojasil, an RPG game that has their characters based on various mythologies from across the world, for the most part. The first is Oden, not Odin, Oden. The unit, however, is a terrible anti-angel with no health and no damage, even with the strong ability. Then we have Valkyrie, who may well guide valiant warriors of the battlefield to Valhalla. The unit themselves is just the worst version of Robocat. Brynhildr, who unlike in the myth, does not pose the strength she does to exact revenge on Siegfried, and ends up being a much weaker cameraman in the end. Suruzu's somewhat long cooldown time and poor freeze chance to uptime ratio leaves her only useful when other anti-red options are lacking. Freya may be associated with love, beauty, gold, and other things. This unit, however, doesn't really live up to the mythical importance of the actual Freya. Her ability to slow Blackened Angel only really works if you can get more than 2 out due to her long attack frequency and the fact that even post treasures only reaches 60% uptime. Her stats for a super rare are also extremely weak, so the only value you can get from them is crowd controlling, though her outranging Sleipnir does give her some form of niche. Last is Odin, father of Thor and head of the Aesir. Odin deals both massive damage and is resistant against angel enemies, sporting an effect of 160,000 health and dealing an effect of 132,000 damage against angels. Odin's stats make him able to do a good enough job as an anti-angel unit, and a cooldown of 74 seconds helps with keeping up enemy pressure with them. Coming up is a quintet Japanese rock band called Kishidan. Each of the units featured, outside of Yankee Cat, a basic tank clone, are all the other band members. These being Sho Anya no Koji, Hikaru Satome, Hitomi Sayonji, Hoshi Grand Mariner, and Shuchikubai Shiratori. All of these band members, except Anya no Koji, are extremely similar in the fact that they're all mid-range attackers. All of their stats, however, easily fall off very quickly due to other stronger options becoming available. Anya no Koji sets himself apart by being strong against red, as well as having the highest general stats of the band. Anya no Koji at level 30 has 51,000 health against reds and deals 39,000 damage with 7.3k DPS. While his stats are pretty great, the cost and especially cooldown make him very tricky to use, as they cost 2,175 and have a cooldown of 34 seconds. This causes him to easily fall behind and leaving a splash on the battlefield, especially nowadays when several stronger anti-red options have been made available. To start us off with our next enemy block, we have Rathalos. Rathalos has an impressive range and gets 75% stronger at 25% HP. At their strongest appearance, they have 1.05 million health and max out with 43,000 nuking damage. Rathian is just as scary as Rathalos, though attacks much closer to your units. They have a 50% chance to weaken units for 6.67 seconds and get 50% stronger at half health. At peak strength, they have 1.68 million HP and max out at 51,000 damage. The Kyoto subway, with all the units except Rei, have enemy counterparts. Moe is an LD attacker that snipes between 300 to 460 range. Saki weakens all units for 5 seconds, and Misa freezes all for 3.33 seconds. Doge, Gori, and the Face have all been given extremely chiseled chins, but for Doge and Gori, they're twice as strong, while the Face is 3 times as strong. Chaparral Tiger has a 50% chance to weaken units. Chaparral Lion doubles their damage to 3,000 at 50% health, and Chaparral Panda has a 50% chance to knock back units. Nibaru-kun has a high range stat and will slow units 75% of the time for 3 seconds. Kuromi is a simple multi-hit attacker. Pochi is another melee single target enemy. Tsuko is bulky and will half of the time knock back your units, and Niamusu has a large range and has a 75% chance to freeze your units. Both Daji and Madhead appear as enemies in the Tower of Savior stages. However, Daji only appears as a gauntlet boss. She is at 100% strength at level 6 and maxes out with 300% strength at 1.2 million health and 30,000 damage. She has an Omni Strike of negative 450 to 450 and slows units for 4 seconds. Madhead is also an Omni Strike enemy that weakens units for 4 seconds and maxes out at 900% magnification. Both Monkey King and Yume have 2 separate enemy forms, where one is objectively stronger than the other. Nimue's weaker form maxes out at 3000% strength, while her stronger form maxes out at 400% magnification. Monkey King's weaker form maxes out at 3500%, but is way weaker than Triple S Monkey King, who maxes out with higher stats at 600% magnification. Every enemy present in the Yurajasil collab is just a standard floating or traitless enemy, except Freya, who has a 75% chance to slow units for 4 seconds. Freya also happens to have 700 range, so she can slow from afar, but lacks any real damage. This isn't to discount Odin's 555 attack range, however. All 5 members of Kishidan also appear as enemies, with Sho Anya no Koji being a red enemy, and all the band members appearing at high magnifications in the final stage. Now we have made it to the top 20 collabs, and to start us off is with a 2-way tie with World Trigger and River City. The World Trigger collab is with the popular anime of the same name. This collab introduces 3 characters, Osamu, Yuma, and Chika. Osamu is a generalist tank with knockback and slow immunity. While solid in the mid game, his long cooldown and no specialized ability eventually eats him away. Yuma is helpful in the early to mid game, especially when traitless options are lacking, but again gets left behind due to their long cooldown and low base health. Last is Chika, who has a rather far LD that can easily snipe enemies like Lenoir, especially due to her high 450 standing range, but again, her somewhat sluggish attack frequency and almost half a minute cooldown keeps her from being viable in the endgame. Back in version 11.9, an error was made in her description, stating that she can freeze black enemies instead of slowing them. This collab gains an auxiliary point due to having a unique soul death animation. Up next is the River City stages, featuring Kunio and Riki-kun. If you are familiar with these 2 units, then you would know why these 2 are some of the most famous collab units in the game. Outside of these 2 units, however, this collab gets most of their points due to just how many unique stages are in the collab. In fact, this collaboration has the second highest stage point score with 7.75 points. Outside of this collab also gains 3 auxiliary points, one of which is the unique music track added for the collab, and the other 2 being combos for Riki and Kunio-kun. While Riki's defense small combo is solid due to it being a 1-slot 10% extra boost in health, Kunio's combo is meta-defining for those that play in ranked dojo. Having to only use 1 slot for 2 wallet levels allows you to have so much more wallet, and in dojo, where you don't get cash from killing enemies, being able to maximize your cash gain is vital into getting the highest score possible. This combo is even good in a lot of lineups where you can afford the 1 slot it takes, as having 2 extra levels on your wallet can make the difference in your long-term cash gain. This next collab is a collab that has appeared in every single version outside of the English version, this being the Gudetama collab. Gudetama is a character made by Emi Nagashima for Sanrio. Gudebene is a wave immune anti-red meat shield, who is fairly pricey and whose stats fall off in the endgame. They spore 19,000 health and deal 3,000 damage against red enemies. Gudetama Plate is an anti-floating meat shield, sporting 40,800 effective HP against them. They're more akin to the likes of Shigon in terms of meat shielding, but their low base health does eventually cause them to fall off. Gude a la Mode is a weaker version of Pizza, but their damage is still strong enough to where they can work as additional supporting damage alongside them to make for a fairly powerful combo of mid-range black nukers. For the first Uber, we have the Nisitama Army, who is an average anti-alien and red crowd control Uber with a 40% chance to knock them back. They do a fine job at what they do, but their bland kit does cause them to get left behind in the endgame. Last is Gude Cat Machine, who, like their regular counterpart, is a solid floating and metal tank. At level 30, they sport an effective 680,000 health and have a 100% chance to freeze them for 4.8 seconds. While some crowd control units like Sanzo and Hoopmaster might make it sound like their crowd control isn't great, their ability to fill any gaps that these 2 may face in crowd controlling gives them a lot of value. This collab gains an auxiliary point for having several of the units in this collab have a unique soul animation upon death. Survive Mola Mola is an indie game where you need to raise a sunfish to adulthood. This collab has a rather awful red meat shield in the form of Cat Torpedo and 2 fairly solid, though min-maxed attackers. Citizen Mola has very similar damage to Mana King Dragon, but costs less and has a much faster cooldown in exchange for having absolutely no health. Any stage that has LD or Omni, Wave, Surge, or Explosions, and this fish is getting served with some chips, but the fact that they can easily stack is great. Last is Master of the Pacific, who is perhaps one of the most humorous units in this game. Just like Citizen Mola, they have absolutely no survivability. However, this is the first collab on this list to have a unit with talents, and this unit has an 80% chance to dodge all enemy attacks, allowing for some pretty unserious strats to be made where this unit can easily guard against several high damage enemies, like Mecha Bun. This collab also gains 2 auxiliary points, as both Sardine and Squid, units that come from Mola Mola, are featured in a non-collab theme set, this being the bug catching set. While Squid is genuinely terrible, Sardine is a fairly solid meat shield in floating heavy stages by the virtue of its cheap cost and having dodge. Up next is Rurouni Kenshin, which tells the story of a wandering samurai to protect the people of Meiji-era Japan. This collab has several extremely good units within it, one of these being Lil Yahiko, a super rare floating and angel rusher who is able to deal 40,800 damage against those traits at level 30. His stats allow him to target several high profile enemies and can slip into blind spots of Cleonel and Queen Bee for example. His health is very much on the lower side, only having 17,000 health. Low Karu may face a lot of competition with Octopus as a floating weakener, with only a 50% chance to do so. Her raw stats and range do allow her to have some niche value in some stages, especially against floating enemies simply due to being able to crowd control them. While all of the Ubers in this collab are solid, with Shinomori being a solid LD floating and angel attacker and crowd control unit, Sanosuke being a fairly alright anti-zombie tanker, and Homura Kenshin being an excellent traitless Aku and surge immune attacker, there is one Uber that this collab is infamous for, this being Saito Hajime, an anti-red Aku rusher with a 100% chance to pierce shields and amazing Omni strikes. While his red niche is good, especially for the likes of Hanya and Okame, his Aku niche is amazing. To keep it short, most Akus rely on their shield for defense, so having a unit that deals 66,000 damage and bypasses the Aku shield makes Saito an extremely powerful rusher against this trait, only further exemplified at higher levels. For our next collab, and our most recent one, we have the Blue Blur himself, Sonic the Hedgehog and his allies from his hit platformer series. Sonic himself is a fairly solid angel rusher, dealing 142,000 damage against them, and he lives up to his name as the fastest thing on the planet by being the fastest unit in the game with his speed stat of 95, surpassing Bullet Train. Although he has a somewhat strange knockback and slow against his target, this can help with his clipping issues by pushing enemies away. He is also freeze and slow immune, which for angels is only really helpful if Sonic is boosted due to a small 26,000 base HP. Tails has an LD that has a 75% chance to weaken and curse red and alien enemies alongside an explosion. While the curse isn't too helpful against red enemies, it can help immensely with aliens, as a lot of aliens have crowd control effects, so being able to shut those down is great. The weaken still gets a lot of value against red enemies due to their more aggressive nature, though his low offensive power and 75% proc chance does hurt his viability a lot, especially in the endgame. Knuckles is strong against red and zombie enemies, giving him an effective health stat of 191,000, while dealing an effective multi-hit attack of 25,000 damage. Knuckles is also wave and weaken immune, and has an Omni Strike of negative 100 to 400 with 350 standing. Knuckles' damage per hit isn't the strongest, but his DPS and sheer health allow him to be a great bruiser unit against red and zombie enemies. Knuckles is able to get value against the likes of Hanya and Berserkori due to his two immunities, but otherwise, these immunities are just for making him viable in some mixed stages. Last is the ultimate life form, Shadow the Hedgehog, who is a sniper unit with 520 range who deals massive damage against black and zombie enemies with slow and toxic immunities. While Shadow may only deal 31,000 damage per hit against his targets, he constantly fires off attacks, giving him an effective DPS stat of 18,000, making him extremely reliable for long-term chipping. Just like the Blue Blur before, he is also the fastest unit in the game with 95 speed. Sonic the Cat can either deal massive damage or resist alien enemies depending on his form. Unfortunately, his stats are too low to be good in either of these situations, as the first form only deals 10,000 damage, and with no health and no range just means at most they're getting one hit in. His second form loses a bunch of speed, and while 51,000 health may sound impressive, remember that Catalyte, hell, even Rover Mark II could do this job as an alien tanker better. Tails Cat is a single target unit and has a 100% chance to slow an angel enemy with LD. With an uptime of 48%, it's fairly decent, but you have to contend with that single target, so he falters hard in spam stages. Last is Shadow the Cat, who is an anti-metal meat shield with 68,000 effective HP and acts more as an early game version of Future Cat, though having the cost of similar meat shields to the like of Ramen and Shigon. Shadow is also fast, so he can get into the front lines much faster, so him and Future actually make some pretty nice synergy with each other. Generally, if you can only bring one, Future is better in pure metal stages, but Shadow's higher base health and plus levels tend to make him better for mixed stages. Shadow is still a really good metal meat shield for when you don't have Future Cat unlocked. This collab gains 4 auxiliary points for including 4 music tracks from the Sonic games. Up next we have Baki Hanma, Son of Ogre, which tells the story of Baki Hanma, a man who strives to be the strongest fighter in the world and to one day surpass his father. The special units are rather unremarkable, as Low Baki is a weak metal killer. Baki Cat's general kit is mainly helpful against Nemorgor, but outside of that, you won't find any use for him. Kaio Cat is just a weaker CAT and Fishman, and Doppelcat is a very hard LD red crowd control unit to use due to his long cooldown. The main gacha units, however, are all extremely solid. Ogre Catface is a fairly competent generalist super rare, on par with Untalented Pizza Cat with fairly solid anti-alien crowd control abilities. This is another one of those collabs where every uber is solid. Baki is a fairly strong generalist unit on par with the likes of Urun and Urs, trading some raw damage to fire off more attacks, and a fast 77-second cooldown. Retsu is the first unit in the game to be a natural-born behemoth slayer, and his targets of red and alien allow him to be an excellent option for Ahirujo, Scissorex, DNL, and one of the best ubers for Bunuglios. Katsumi is a fine alien and red attacker, but his kit is fairly simple compared to the rest of these ubers. Jack Hanma is a solid zombie and metal crowd control unit who is able to directly damage metals due to his 18% metal killer ability. However, just like with Kenshin, this collab introduces an extremely powerful anti-Aku uber in the game. This being Kaoru Hanayama. His comically high stats, along with both resistance and massive damage against Aku, on top of shield piercing, allow him to blow up a wide range of Aku enemies. Remember why Saito's shield piercing was powerful on him? Well, take that idea and jack it up to 11 with Hanayama. Though his style of attack is focusing all of his energy into a single punch that takes time to charge up, so he lures enemies close to nuke them all. At level 50, his damage is strong enough to one-shot the likes of even 200% Midnight D. He is susceptible while he's charging his punch, however, so extra defense is needed to really keep him safe in mixed stages. This collab gains an auxiliary point due to the unique gacha event that was made to acquire most of the special units via the legendary dumbbells. Ranma Half is our next collab, and this collab is based on the manga of the same name, which sees Ranma Satome, a trained martial artist who receives a curse in which he transforms into a woman when exposed to cold water, and back to a man when exposed to hot water. We're starting to get to the point where there's just too many collab units to fully cover them, so I'll be going through each of them in rapid succession, or well with a few sentences max, though this isn't to say some sections are going to be short. Ranma Cat is a multi-hit floating crowd control unit with dodge or massive damage, but their stats are too low for them to get a lot of value outside of the early game. Akane Cat deals a lot of damage with Savage Blow, but by the time she becomes viable, more options should be available, especially due to her 210 range. Genma Satome is an alright anti-traitless and Aku attacker, dealing 33,000 damage against them with 9,000 DPS. Tatewaki Kuno is an angel crowd control unit who has multi-hit and a 15% chance to proc their slow and knockback, 10% dodge, and knockback immunity. His abilities are okay, but there are certainly better options. Yuko Kyonji is a solid metal crowd control unit, having a 50% chance to weaken for 8 seconds and has a 3% chance to crit, on top of knockback immunity. Area attack in solid range allows her to keep groups of metal enemies controlled. Haposai is a unit who has a 30% chance to knock back red, floating, and zombie enemies, and with the multi-hit and generally good stats, allow him to be a fairly flexible unit. Ranma Satome is a fairly decent red floating attacker, and depending on which form you use, you can either counter freezing enemies or enemies at slow. Akane Tendo is a general LD attacker with a 30% chance to Savage Blow, a 100% chance to break barriers, and immunities to knockback, freeze, slow, and weaken. Housewife as she was an uber, if you will. These next three are a lot like Ultra Souls units. Ryoga Hibiki knocks back black and metal enemies, and is also resistant against them, alongside a 3% chance to crit in his second form. This unit's kit is an odd mishmash of abilities that don't really allow them to excel in anything they're trying to do. Shampoo in both forms is a solid peon cleaner, with her mini-wave spam allowing your units to target the bigger threats present in the level, especially in her evolved form. Mouse is an average LD unit, who can curse zombies and aliens for 6 seconds. While the curse may not be helpful for zombies, Curse is a fairly solid ability against aliens, where a large number of them have some form of crowd control ability. Last is Ranma Satome in her leotard or casual cheering outfit. They are an LD unit who has a 100% chance to freeze black and angel enemies for 2.4 seconds. While the freeze itself is extremely short, it is a tool that, thanks to her LD, allows you to have some slight breathing room. Depending on what outfit she wears, her leotard gives her wave immunity, and her cheering outfit gives her surge immunity. Metal Slug is a series of run and gun games with various spin-offs that have been around for decades. Hayakutaro is an awful meat shield unit, and all of the rares are just worse versions of already existing units. Mars People is a weaker Thaumaturge, Theo is a weaker Psychocat, Eri is a weaker Chill, Tarma, despite having area attack, is weaker Little Macho Legs, Marco is a weaker Seafarer, though can outrange Super Cosmic Cyclone and Raging Bahamut. Alan O'Neill is a weaker Dragon, whose only redeeming quality is Survive. The SV-001 is on par with Drama Cats. Haidu Mark III is an alright anti-floating Uber due to their relatively cheap cost of 3,525 and fairly solid anti-floating stats, having 210,000 effective HP and dealing 62,000 effective damage against them. Golden Morden CC is an alright traitless and alien knockback unit, who is also resistant against them, having 191,000 health against traitless and 238,000 against aliens. Golden Jupiter CC is an extremely solid generalist unit, having a rather consistent surge spawn area, allowing them to have a max DPS of 9,400 against non-surge immune enemies even at level 30. Their barrier breaker and solid knockback and slow against aliens allow them to hold a lot of ground, and due to the surge spawn placement, can snipe barriers that are just out of reach. Huge Hermit is a rather famous collab unit, mainly due to their rather poor stats against everything they fight. They're strong against black and alien enemies, having 184,000 HP against them, and dealing 13,000 damage with 18,000 DPS. While that DPS sounds great, their poor survivability won't allow them to get much done in the long term due to their 166 range. Soul Day Rocker is an alright multi-omni unit that deals massive damage against reds, aliens, and angels alongside Colossus Slayer. However, due to the way the Omni Strike is split, they will only land 2 out of their 3 hits, but even then, it's a pretty impressive 204,000 damage. Soul Day Rocker's targets make him an excellent unit for Baron Seal, who, thanks to their Colossus Slayer, allows him to deal 326,000 damage to the beast, while sporting 131,000 health to tank a hit or two. Power Pro Baseball is a sports game developed by Konami. Aiko and Gundar is a 4-star macho legs in terms of strength, but Slime makes this unit irrelevant. Satori Hikami is just a weaker Dread Pirate Catly. Sairi Nijitani, while having an amazing weekend uptime of 218% against Angels, falls very short due to her single targeting, making units like Thaumaturge more appealing to use. Misaki Kono is an okay early game alien tank, but once you get Rover, there is almost no reason to use her. Ren Katagiri is only helpful against Miss Haka and Big Sal, as her stats are way too low to be used anywhere else. Karen Nekozuka is just a worse Necro Dancer. Aoi Hayakawa is a more juiced up version of Chillcat when looking at raw stats, including range, except for a much longer recharge time. She deals 43,000 damage against aliens at 200 range. Her true form gives her an LD, allowing her to snipe enemies like Ursa Major and Moth, but now has to contend with a blind spot. Mizuki Tachibana is a solid melee angel attacker, with 40,800 damage and 11,000 DPS. True form turns her into a mid-ranger with 12,000 DPS. Hijiri Rukuro is like the other super rares, but focuses on zombies instead. However, she has single target, which is something her true form rectifies, but in exchange reduces her overall offensive power, dealing 16,000 damage against zombies, while having 57,000 health against them. Saki Nijima is a black and floating slower, giving her utility against the likes of rather aggressive enemies, with her true form granting slow immunity and general stat buffs. Subaru Hoshi is strong against angels and reds with LD. His usage is fine, dealing 36,000 damage with 85,000 effective HP against his targets. True form gives him general stat buffs, such as 119,000 effective HP and 55,000 effective damage, alongside a slightly larger LD. Last is Miyabi Oyama, who is one of those units you throw in just to have another general backliner. True form gives her solid stat buffs and a niche as a wave immune attacker. This collab had gotten an auxiliary point due to featuring a unique music track for the stages present in the collab. We have a rather lengthy enemy group discussion, as this is where the collabs start having a wide range of enemies. Osamu is a tanker enemy who doesn't really deal all too much damage, but is stacked with immunities to knockback, wave, freeze, slow, weaken, and surges. Yumakuga is slightly more threatening, with him boosting his attack power by 100% at half health. Last are the Marmods, who you can only fight with the World Trigger units. As such, these enemies at their strongest are fairly threatening, but with sufficient levels, should be no problem. Just as there are the Gudetama units, we have very similar enemy counterparts. Gudetama Plate is just like a hippo. Gude Ela Mode is able to knock back units 50% of the time. The Nisatama army is the main enemy of the collab, but is your standard range attacker. Gude Doge Machine is the closest we'll get to having a cat machine enemy, standing at 390 range with huge damage and a 100% chance to freeze units for 6 seconds, but it doesn't attack all that often. Last is the Gude Bene Cat with a large 420 range and guarantee slow for 4 seconds. Pretty much every single enemy in Survive Mola Mola is extremely frail, but the likes of Young Man Mola and Mola King do pack a punch, and Mola King can even get fairly bulky, but both are single target. Last and the only naturally bulky enemy is Ayumi Mabosaki, a floating variant of Sunfish Jones. While they aren't all too threatening, their strongest appearance in the Mola Mola Gauntlet sees them with an absurd 6.48 million health and dealing nearly 150,000 damage. The Kenshin enemies are a lot like their unit counterparts. Kenshin is a ranged attacker, Sanosuke is an Omni Strike attacker, Shinomori is an LD freezer who freezes for 5 seconds, and Saito is a rusher with great piercing. Sonic is a very speedy traitless enemy with an Omni Strike and will slow your units for 2 seconds as well as knock them back. Sonic is also immune to freeze and slow. Tails is a floating enemy and, unlike his unit counterpart, cannot curse, but has a 50% chance to weaken units for 3 seconds and can cause an explosion. His LD stretches from 240 to 640. Knuckles is a red multi-hit enemy who is both immune to weaken and waves. Last is Shadow, who is a black enemy with a high standing range, the same 95 speed as his unit counterpart, but with an Omni Strike of negative 300 to 550 and is slow immune. Baki's enemies are in similar vein with the Kenshin units, though Baki himself is somewhat different in the fact that he has an Omni Strike that can easily juggle units. He still retains his slow and explosion immunity, and his 75% knockback chance, and even his slight crit chance. Retsu loses the Savage Blow, only being able to freeze for 3 seconds half of the time. Hanayama is a brick wall, retaining all the relevant immunities from his unit counterpart. Katsumi is just a ranged attacker, and Jock is an Omni Strike weakener, weakening for 4 seconds. Ranma Half is also in a similar vein with their enemies. Ranma himself is an Omni Strike attacker, Akane is an LD attacker who can Savage Blow, Hibiki can knock back units, Shampoo will both spam mini waves, and can slow units for 2 seconds. Last is Mouse, who is an LD enemy who can weaken units for 4 seconds. Mars People and Marco are short-range attackers, while Alan O'Neill and SV001 are ranged attackers. Huge Hermit is a wall, and Donald Morden is fairly tanky and attacks from a range. Jupiter King is one of the stronger enemies in this collab, with a beefy health stat, an astounding 570 range, and a 100% chance to knock back units. Haidu is a lot like Jupiter King, except is way bulkier in exchange of a floating trait and shorter range, even if 480 is still a lot. Last is the Gauntlet boss Sol de Rocker, who is a multi-omni unit who can consistently hit units in 2 of their range spots. At their strongest appearance, they have 2.4 million health and can deal 60 to 120,000 damage to a unit. The 4 date chance units are unlocked from fighting enemy counterparts. Sairi is a mid-range weaker, weakening for 5 seconds. Misaki is simply bulky and hits hard. Ren knocks back all units but has a short 150 range. Karen will freeze units for 2 seconds. The first enemy base in this video is Professor Wild, which will go off every 10 seconds and will slow and weaken all units for 5 seconds. Last is the Hater, which, while attacks often, is a single target attacker. Now we have finally reached the top 10 collabs of Fate Stay Night Heaven's Feel. This is a popular anime trilogy of movies which tells the tale of Shiro and Sakura, 2 individuals who are affected by a conflict between mages in an event called the Holy Grail War. Both of the Shiro units are not that great in their roles, specifically Low Shiro being a black tank and Shiro Cat being a black attacker. Low Sakura is just like Maneko in terms of being the first crit unit you get. Dreaming Sakura Cat is a somewhat fast attacking crit unit with a 20% chance to knock back. However, their 5% crit chance makes other options more appealing. Saber the Cat is an okay early to mid-game anti-floating staller due to being immune to most statuses and being strong against them. At level 30, she has 48,400 health, but deals an unimpressive 3,000 damage against them. All of the rare units are somewhat poor in terms of their strength and crowd control abilities. Mage Rin does have range, but their single target limits their ability to knock back aliens. Snow Fairy Ilias red slowing is much better done by Enchantress. Heroic Spirit Rider Cat can be a solid early game anti-angel, but Sanzo Angel Target removes a lot of this unit's usability. Last is Heroic Spirit Archer Cat, who only gains value in wave spam stages due to their wave immunity. Gilgamesh and Kotome Cats have 2 different targets depending on the form. First form weakens black enemies, while the second form weakens zombies, and both forms strengthen by 50% power. Their stats and crowd controlling are very much a mixed bag on their viability. Saber Alter is easily one of the most interesting rushers due to her LD, allowing her to easily pierce several enemies that would be out of her reach normally. Against floating, she has 20,000 DPS, easily allowing her to shred through a ton of floating enemies. Ren Tosaka is not too great against zombies, but her knockback is nice for aliens, and her stats are average. Ilyasville again has fine stats, but a somewhat uninteresting and underwhelming ability in slowing red and metal. Lacking crit hurts her usage against metals. Archer is a very bare bones LD unit, whose wave immunity gives him usage in wave heavy stages. Lancer is a very average backliner, who's good at breaking barriers. Ryder is a solid anti-angel freezer, freezing them for 3.6 seconds for 64% uptime. Gilgamesh is a weaker Ganesha, whose multi-hit is more of a curse than a blessing, as they could easily miss one or two of their hits against an enemy, making his max strength weaker than what it actually is. Dark Sakura is a black zombie and alien tank who's immune to waves, freeze, and has soul strike. She has an effective 612,000 HP, allowing her to tank several hits. Her damage is fine, but if you're willing to lose the slow immunity and slower attack rate in exchange for her non-attacking corpses, then her second form is still just as viable. Hatsune Miku, easily the most famous Vocaloid in the world, is next. Even if you don't know what a Vocaloid is, you've probably at least seen this blue-haired girl once. All of the 4 cat units are dodge beat shields, with Miku dodging floating, Len dodging metal, Ren dodging black, and Luca dodging aliens. Outside of the early game, these 4 lose a lot of value due to not having the health for the upkeep they need for general defense, especially with their price tags to actually send them out. Kaito and Cat is meant for pure zombie tanking, and can act as a secondary line of defense for Shigon due to their rather impressive effective health of 212,000 HP. Maiko and Cat is an alright LD red attacker. However, since her release, a package delivery man has since dropped and effectively does her job better in basically every way. Hatsune Miku herself is a multi-purpose unit, with strong against red, floating, and angel with a 2.4 second weaken against them. Miku has 106,000 effective health and 38,000 effective damage. While she won't excel against her specific targets, her roll compression can be helpful for some stages. Kagamine Rin and Len both knockback and slow black and metal enemies with knockback immunity. This immunity ironically makes them worse at crowd controlling the likes of Super Metal Hippo due to their LD, but it can still work. As for black enemies, it mainly works for higher range enemies like Lenoir and Dark Laser. Sakura Miku is an okay LD alien freezer, but has a rather poor 30% barrier breaker chance. Megura and Luca has fairly solid damage output against black and floating enemies, dealing 75,000 damage against them, and her LD allows her to snipe enemies like Lenoir. Her somewhat short standing range and 2 knockbacks does cause her to die pretty often, however. 2020 Osaku Miku deals massive damage against red and angels, with a 10% chance to savage blow. If all 3 of her hits are able to land, she'll deal an effective 76,000 damage. This unit is a lot like Twin Stars, okay juggling potential, but extreme fragility. On the other side of the 2020 Mikus, we have 2020 Tokyo Miku. She instead resists Red and Angel and has the extremely rare Wave Blocker ability. Miku has an effective 484,000 health, but her main appeal is being a ranged Wave Blocker. Snow Miku 2021 is an LD anti-traitless attacker who can freeze them. Specialized anti-traitless units are fairly hard to come by for most parts of the game, so her stats allow her to have a ton of value on top of her freeze. She has an effective 95,000 health and deals an effective 43,000 damage. Last is the 16th anniversary Miku. This Miku is strong against black enemies and can slow them for 2.4 seconds with a fairly wide surge spawn. She's meant for pure crowd controlling, so her use is mainly helpful for Lenoir. She has an effective 165,000 HP stat and deals an effective 29.6k damage. This collab gains a ton of auxiliary points due to adding a ton of official Miku songs on top of a few collab specific themes, totaling 7 unique music tracks. They also gain a bonus point for all of the Miku units having a unique soul upon death. Our last tie in this list is between Bakuramin and Annihilated City. First to discuss is Bakuramin. Bakuramin is a wafer snack brand. To get it out of the way, their wafer gacha is what gave them their auxiliary points, and this gacha has 5 special units. Strike Angel weakens red, black, and zombie enemies, but only has a 50% chance to do so, and with no stats, she won't be doing anything, especially with that 24-second cooldown time. Warrior King Cat is an okay pizza replacement for 4-star if you lack other options, having an effective 54,000 HP and dealing an effective 11,000 damage against them. Infernal Devil's in a similar build, but for angel attackers, with an effective 53,000 health and dealing an effective 16,000 damage. Once again, Old Guardian Cat is an okay 4-star alien attacker, with 56,000 HP and dealing 26,000 damage. Last is Heavenly Lord Jack, who's just an okay pickpocketer, but Can makes this unit pretty useless. Rampaging Yamato is an okay early game alien zombie rusher, being able to deal 12,000 damage against them per hit. However, his 31-second cooldown leaves a lot to be desired. Huge Nero is a solid anti-zombie attacker, dealing 86,700 damage in total, and their huge negative Omni Strike allows them to snipe many zombie enemies that burrow behind them. Ghost Alibaba is a fairly solid LD attacker against Black and Angel enemies, dealing 35,000 damage against them. However, their long cooldown of 44 seconds does make them absurdly hard to stack. Super S Zeus resists all traded enemies and weakens them all for 4 or 4.8 seconds. He's also immune to knockback, freeze, slow, and weaken. Talents give him Z-Kill, warp immunity, and lower cost. His resist gives him an effective 122,000 health or 153,000 health with treasures. This unit's fine at what he does, but requires additional crowd control support to get full value out of him. Head Rococo has a 100% chance to freeze floating, black, and alien enemies for 3.3 seconds and is strong against them. Talents give him 30% knockback, slow immunity, and Colossus Slayer. This unit has an effective 127,000 health and deals an effective 55,000 damage. Their Colossus Slayer and slow immunity talents make them fairly viable for Super Hypo, giving them an effective 182,000 health and dealing an effective 88,000 damage. Super D Devil deals massive damage to angels with LD and is immune to slow, on top of slowing for 6 seconds. Talents give them 50% weaken, relic targeting, and curse immunity. They do a fairly solid job as an angel specialist, dealing 108,000 damage. Their talents allow those cruising through Uncanny Legends to have a fairly solid attacker with 81,000 damage and being able to slow them down. Wonder Maria is a fairly strong anti-red attacker, dealing 157,000 damage with 30,000 DPS. She is also wave immune, giving her flexibility there. However, her poor health stat of 28,000 health can cause her to die easily if you aren't careful. Heracris is an extremely powerful single target nuker. Depending on their form, they target floating, alien, or relic. In their first two forms, their effective stats are 255,000 HP and they deal an effective 275,000 damage, while for relics, they have an effective 204,000 health while dealing an effective 229,000 damage. The first two forms have warp immunity, while true form is curse immune, and all forms have slow immunity. An extremely good specialist nuker, but requires the assistance via peon killers, such as waivers to maximize their damage. Shaman Khan is an LD crowd control unit who has a 30% chance to knock back and slow traded enemies for 2 to 2.4 seconds. Their LD helps you assist with other crowd control units and keeps longer traded targets away from the front lines, but their low proc chance can cause them to not activate at all. Almighty Super Zeus is a clone of Thunder God Zeus, who is resistant to both Angel and Aku, has a 75% chance to slow for 3 or 3.6 seconds, and has Counter Surge. Their Counter Surge can make enemies like Saint Dober and various Aku enemies much more dynamic to fight, as Zeus will be able to fire off several Counter Surges. Their effective health against Aku is 272,000, and for Angels, it's 340,000 effective health. Last is one of the 2 legend rare collab units to exist. For Bakuramin, this is Dark Lord Zeus, a legend rare who deals insane damage against traitless with 300 to 700 LD and weaken immunity. At level 30, they deal an effective 212,000 damage against traitless enemies with 22,000 DPS, allowing them to have a very valuable niche as traitless attackers for the majority of the game are hard to come by. The final tie in this list is with Annihilated City, an action RPG game who, while may have less units, makes up for it in several other areas. The 2 Yuki Cats both have a 20% chance to freeze their respective targets, these being floating for regular Yuki and alien for redhead Yuki. However, redhead Yuki has a true form that gives her a surge, which gives her a pseudo area attack and can be a solid 4-star replacement for Seafarer. Takuya and Yuki are speedy floating tanks, but in their true form gives them double bounty. However, their value is quickly overshadowed by Octopus and Bullet Train. Similar story for Kano and Soma, except replace floating with aliens and remove the double bounty, as better alien tanking options are out there. Mystery Cat Girl Yuki is a pretty solid floating nuker, dealing 172,000 damage against them and is weak and immune, allowing for Klee 1 usage, though her talents are not that great. Being a lawn TBA nuker makes her 50% knockback ability effectively barely activate. Toxic resist doesn't help with her survivability all that much, and cost down only makes her 450 cents cheaper, which isn't worth the NP. Craze Yuki is in a similar boat that she's a good nuker, but for red and black instead, where she deals 253,000 effective damage. However, just like regular Yuki, her talents aren't all that great, though her wave resist is interesting. This is mainly because of the wave resist talent orb, which if you have the talent maxed out and an S rank orb, you can give her full wave immunity, though you would most of the time would just rather boost one of her target traits through the orbs. Last of the Yuki trio is Lost World Yuki, who, like before her, is a solid nuker for her traits, this time against Alien and Angel, dealing 136,000 damage against them, and can break barriers. Her talents are okay, but her Aku targeting can help those who lack any anti-Aku specialists, as she deals 102,000 damage against them. Cat Ear Soma is a CC unit against floating, Angel, and Alien enemies, where he weakens and slows them for 6 seconds. While he is fragile, this amount of crowd control capabilities against several traits gives him very good roll compression, though his talents are alright at best. Curse immunity helps with the likes of Autumn, but his own curse only has 46% uptime post treasures, so it's not really worth the investment. Hacker Geek Cat is a Hacker Cat variant that weakens all non-metal enemies for 2.67 seconds or 3.2 seconds, allowing them to be paired extremely well with Cyberpunk, though bringing other weakener units can make them somewhat redundant. Stylish Soma Cat is a weaker version of Manic Macho Legs, who, while their 4-star value would be great, Slime mostly makes this unit irrelevant once you get them. This collab gains 4 auxiliary points for including 4 unique music tracks, 1 in the main menu, and 3 unique battle tracks. Puella Magi Madoka Magica is a magical girl anime which tells the story of magical girls that must fight against the terrors on the world known as witches. Lo Madoka and Lo Hamura are both units that were designed to give some of the other collabs a boost within the collab event. This collab had gotten 2 auxiliary points due to the My Very Best Friend combo and what it boosts. Witch Killer is an exclusive ability that some of the collab units have, and was made to fight against the rather gigantic stab boosted enemies which all have the witch attribute onto them. The rare cats are all early game units, as all of them are easily replaceable once you hit mid game. Madoka Cat sometimes slows floating, Hamura Cat sometimes freezes black enemies, Sayaka Cat faces harsh competition as a generalist attacker, Mommy Cat is a somewhat weak anti-angel attacker, and Kyoko Cat sometimes weakens red enemies. Kyubey Cat is just a basic cat clone that sometimes survives lethal strikes, giving them quite a bit of value in 4-star stages where there is less competition. Kyubey himself is an anti-alien tank and has a 50% chance to survive lethal strikes. He has an effective 84,000 health against them, and while his tanking is great for the early to mid game, once you get Soap, Kyubey doesn't really need to be used anymore. Ultimate Madoka is a rather potent LD attacker against floating, zombie, and relic enemies and can slow them for 3 seconds or 3.6 seconds. Her damage against relics is 94,000 damage and she deals 125,000 damage against her other targets. Her slow is nice in keeping her targets still for a short while. Ultimate Madoka is also the reason this collab got another auxiliary point, as instead of having the normal soul animation, she simply ascends back to her domain. Devil Hamura is a fairly solid LD attacker against red, black, and Aku enemies while having a 50% chance to freeze them for 4 seconds or 4.8 seconds. Her effective health is at 96,200 or 120,000 with treasures, and her damage is at 62,000 or 75,000 effective damage. Her freeze, while not 100%, is still solid enough to where you can get some breathing room when fighting her 3 traits, though do mind she will need support in breaking shields. Sayaka is a solid generalist who has respectable damage output, especially when strengthened, and her knockback immunity gives her value against some enemies like Mr. Mole. She is also able to survive a lethal hit, giving her one last hurrah before going down. Mami Tomo is just an all-around good LD angel nuker, dealing almost 160,000 damage per hit, allowing her to nuke enemies like Calamaria and Sleipnir. Kyoko is fairly solid at crowd controlling red enemies, though her knockback and weaken is only at a 50% chance to proc. The weaken, however, lasts an impressive 9.6 seconds with treasures. Her damage and weaken immunity makes her useful for Hanya, on top of her red crowd control effects. Bebe is an alright alien and zombie weakener. She is a lot like a first form pixie in the sense that her stats are more similar to super rares, with a relatively fast cooldown of 17 seconds and a cost of 1200. Nagisa is the evolved state of Bebe, who now has a 30% chance to break barriers, a 30% dodge chance, and a 6-second weaken instead of a 2-second weaken. Nagisa is solid at weakening her targets due to her multi-hits, and it gives her a fairly respectable effective chance to break barriers. Burgle Cat and Homura are a Shitakiri clone who target floating and angels with a mini surge instead of a mini wave. The first form is okay at best, but Alien is a solid target for them. Magical Cat Magica, the evolved form, is a fairly solid alien cursor, as aliens tend to have a lot of crowd control effects, and they are wave immune instead of surge immune, though this wave immunity is mainly helpful in mixed stages. This is the last group enemy discussion, as after this, there's just simply too many enemies in the top 5 collabs to where I could discuss them in one section. Rin Tosaka is a standard range attacker. Ilias Vel is a multi-hit enemy who has a 30% chance to slow your units for 3 seconds. Saber is a speedy Omni-Strike attacker, and Saber Alter gives an additional level 3 wave attack. Lancer is a high-range knockbacker, Archer is an LD sniper, Rider will freeze units for 4 seconds in her 450 range, and Gilgamesh has an LD and boosts his attack at half health. The Hatsune Miku collab has several enemies, including some base game enemies that have been Mikufied. The first is Miku Doge, a faster Doge variant who has a 20% chance to dodge. Miku Bear is a juiced up teacher bear, but is a single target enemy. Miku Gori is gory if they were bulkier, faster, and had a 50% chance to knock back units. Miku herself is a floating enemy that can weaken units. Her Sakura counterpart is an LD enemy who freezes units for 3.33 seconds and is immune to knockback, weaken, slow, and freeze. Her Snowy counterpart has a rather large Omni-Strike of -600 to 600. Her 16th anniversary counterpart will slow your units for 2 seconds and will spawn a surge between 150 to 950 range. Rin and Len are LD attackers that knock back and slow your units for 2 seconds. Luca has a rather large LD and can warp your units back by 1000 range. Wonder Maria is a fairly bulky Omni-Strike enemy that delivers knockback. Satan Maria is a standard range attacker, while Super Devil is an LD attacker that slows units for 4 seconds. Beastly Nero is a multi-hit attacker that has very little forward piercing, but has a large backwards Omni-Strike. This collab has the only Angel collab enemies in the game, starting with Head Rococo, who is a very powerful Omni-Strike attacker who will freeze your units for 4 seconds. Super Zeus has solid range and can weaken units for 5 seconds. Then we have Heracris, who, while has extremely high attack area due to Omni-Strike, their single target means they won't kill much. Last is Shaman Khan, who is an LD knockback enemy. For our Annihilated City enemies, we have 3 very similar enemies in Takuya and Lovely Yuki, and Kano and Soma. While the former 2 are basically the same in how they work, Kano and Soma are shorter range in exchange for a level 2 wave. The 3 Yukis work similarly with each other. Base Yuki is just a high-range floating enemy, Lost World Yuki weakens units for 4 seconds, and Craze Yuki has a somewhat far-piercing Omni-Strike. Messier is the gauntlet boss of this collab, and has a rather large Omni-Strike of -350 to 600 range, triples in damage at 20% HP, and is immune to freeze and weaken. Last is Redhead Muscle Yuki Cat, who freezes all units for 0.67 seconds, and will spawn a level 1 surge between 150 to 600 range. The Madoka Magica collaboration introduces a brand new type of enemy that is exclusive to this collab, these being the Witches. This collab features 6 witch enemies. The first is the Rose Garden Witch, who's simply a ranged attacker. Then we have the Desert Witch, who is a weak area attacker that is usually spam. An alternate form this witch takes is dubbed Obsession form, a larger, more serpentine form that delivers a devastating bite. The Box Witch and minions are bulky and hard-hitting mid-range attackers. Fun fact, this enemy has 2 screens that are used for the idle animation, but since the actual enemy has 0 TBA, these effectively go unused outside of the enemy guide. Then we have Velpilgashnacht, a devastating powerhouse with an Omni-Strike of -2000 to 1500 who will nuke most units in one hit and has a 100% chance to crit, so not even Metal Cat can tank her hits. On top of this, she has Base Destroyer. She will also slow any units that do survive her attack for 2.5 seconds. She is also immune to waves, knockback, freeze, slow, and weaken. At her strongest appearance of 600%, she has 14.4 million health and deals an effective 480,000 damage, meaning a level 45 boulder is needed to survive her attack. Also, due to her large Omni-Strike, she doesn't even have to move too far to nuke your base. Last is the Nutcracker Witch, who, while doesn't hit as hard as Velpilgashnacht, still has a very long range of negative 1800 to 1800, will knock back all units and weaken them for 5 seconds. She also has a base destroyer and is immune to waves, knockback, slow, freeze, and weaken. The Nutcracker Witch is the enemy with the highest base HP in the game at 9 million base HP. Her strongest showing has her at 13.5 million HP and dealing 18,000 damage, and with the weaken ability effectively doubles its HP stat to 27 million HP. Last are the two non-witch enemies of the collab, being variants of Cube. The first one is a rapid attacker, and the second one trades raw damage for a level 2 wave. The first one is simply Cube, which is also interestingly spelled differently, while the waving variant is called Incubator. We have finally made it to the top 5 collabs in history, and this number 5 spot is held by our last version exclusive collab with Castle and Dragon. Castle and Dragon is a real-time strategy game published by Asobism. This collab is carried heavily by the sheer amount of units, true forms, and enemies that are featured. Swordsman of the Ming Emperor is a meat shield, and despite getting 150% strengthened in true form, it quite literally can't make use of it due to them being a very weak meat shield. Thunderclap Horseman Cavalry is just Lion Cat, but without health, and the only boost they get in true form is an extra 10 speed. Ashura is a very poor knockback unit, with short range and no health, and only a 25% chance to knock back a single target. UFO Battle Balloon is an extremely weak ranged attacker, and with a 23.2 second cooldown, is pretty difficult to stack. Dragon Rider is just a worse dragon in every way, and despite true form doubling their damage, they deal a very measly small 2000 damage. Their one saving grace is that they can be stacked somewhat easily in the early game due to their 3.53 second cooldown. Cyber Pretty Cat is perhaps one of the only okay units in this collab, as they have a 10% chance to freeze any single target for 2 seconds, but their fairly fast attack rate and a cooldown of 5.87 seconds can give them some very niche uses. Cyclops is an alright unit at most, acting as a unit that can supplement Dragon Cat and can be used in 4-star stages. Volcano Golem is alright at best, acting as a backline attacker with a 20% chance to slow everything they hit outside of floating enemies, though their cooldown of 71.2 seconds and their slow attack rate means it will take a while to get value out of this unit. Black Swordsman is an anti-zombie meat shield, having an effective 23,000 or 29,000 HP with treasures against them. For a good chunk of the game, this unit can act as a solid addition to anti-zombie lineups for things like outbreaks, though their stats do fall off eventually. The last unit is a Lightning Lolclops Egg, an in-app purchase unit who is strong against straightless and has a 20% chance to deliver a savage blow. This unit's usage is incredibly niche, as their port range of 140 leaves them only really usable against LD traitless enemies like Delphina and Henry. At level 30, they have 36,000 HP and deal 2,700 damage against traitless. A large chunk of this collab's points, 38% to be exact, come from the wide range of enemies that are present in here. You have a majority of the units and their true forms as unique enemy types. The two swordsmen are simple peon enemies. The cavalry twins are simply speedy melee attackers. Ashura has a 30% chance to knock back units, while Kabuki Ashura has a 50% chance to do so. The floating battle twins are simply ranged attackers. The Dragon Riders are single-target floating enemies. The Pretty Cats are mid-range attackers. Cyclops and 4D Cyclops are one and the same, just with stat differences. Last is the Golem Twins, where regular Golem has a 50% chance to slow units for 4 seconds, while Volcano Golem bumps this chance up to 75%. Princess Punt is an action role-playing game published by Gun Ho Online Entertainment. Princess Punt is easily one of the largest collabs and is also the very first thing the Battle Cats had ever collabed with, all the way back in version 1.4, before even the gacha was a thing. The collab being in the Japanese version for 10 years at the point it came to EN was also a major selling point once this collab had finally been brought over to the English version. Cat Princess Beauty is a rusher who's okay in the early game but quickly loses relevance. Oversleeping Beauty Pun is an okay early game Titan variant, but once you start getting levels on Chimera, then you don't really need to use them. Bridal Princess Punt is speedy, yet faces stiff competition and falls behind the likes of Butterfly and Maglev Cats. Swordsman Johnny is a meat shield who is easily outclassed in every stage of the game. Giraffe Princess is a better tomboy lion, but that isn't saying much. They deal 2,000 damage with 6,000 DPS against black enemies, but with no health, they won't get much done at all. Crystal Little Gao Gao is an amazing anti-black meat shield, having similar health to an untalented Ramen, on top of knockback immunity. At level 30, they have 85,000 health against black enemies, and since the Princess Punt collab only contains the collab exclusive units, getting plus levels is rather easy for them due to only 3 rares existing. Judgment is an okay anti-black crowd controller, with a 40% chance to slow them for 4.8 seconds with solid damage, 360 range, and multi-hit. Their cooldown is on the longer side with 31.2 seconds. Gekirinchi is solid for when you may not have that many angel counters, as they're strong against them. However, their cooldown of 54.33 seconds does make it hard to stack them. At level 30, they have 102,000 effective health and deal an effective 18,000 damage against angels. Swordswoman Hina is just manic macho legs, but if you cut their attack to a third of what it was, and then remove 75 range for them. PPT 46, despite being an Uber, has the stats of a super rare and the crowd control odds of a super rare as well. They have a 40% chance to freeze black enemies for 3.6 seconds and have a cooldown of 20.87 seconds, but their stats are rather low with only 15,000 health and 8,000 damage. Her anti-angel talents allow her to be viable against enemies like Sleipnir due to her range, but her other talents are not that great. Manic Princess Punt is a super backliner with a 50% chance to knock back medals. Her 780 range allows her to stay safe from most threats, but her low 22,000 health stat does leave her vulnerable to any piercing attacks. The only worthwhile talent of hers is crit, even if it only has a 5% chance to activate, but seeing as you primarily would use her in metal stages, it doesn't hurt if she wipes out a group of small metal enemies. HMS Princess 2 CC is a backliner that's made to earn you cash from picketing off weaker enemies. Her stats are closer to super rares, but still has a somewhat lengthy cooldown of 76 seconds. Wave immunity can expand her role in stages where waves are present, but her other talents aren't all too special. Collab is an iffy angel zombie alien weakener, weakening for 3.6 seconds, and her stats aren't anything special. Hermie is a fairly solid anti-zombie unit, with an Omni Strike of negative 800 to 375, allowing her to snipe many zombies behind her. Her effective health against them is 136,000, and if all 3 of her multi-hits land, she deals 63,000 damage. There is a wide range of enemies present in this collab. Kirihime, Logao, and Swordsman have 2 different forms. The first forms are all weak enemies with very poor stats. Their second forms are a bit stronger. Kirihime gains a massive amount of range, going to 1300 range, but still attacks rather infrequently. Logao gains a large boost to raw stats, allowing him to be an excellent wall. Swordsman is still rather weak, but he does hit a lot harder now. Bridal Princess Punt is like Form 2 Kirihime, except now she can knock back units. Oversleeping Beauty Punt is a tanky wall with a somewhat weak attack. Both Yorinchi and Gekirinchi are floating enemies, although Yorinchi is an extremely weak enemy with melee range. Gekirinchi, however, has a lot more range and way more threatening stats. Judgment is a fairly strong area attacker that will slow all of your units for 4 seconds, with the multi-hit to spread this slow time for a longer period. Last is the Princess Head, who is a lot like Shy Boy, low range but attacks fast. At number 3 is the Neon Genesis Evangelion collab. Neon Genesis Evangelion is a franchise that focuses on the paramilitary organization NERV and their efforts to fight beings known as angels with Evangelions and their pilots. This collab is the collab with the most units present, with an astounding 28 units available to obtain. Just like with the Madoka Magica collab, this collab introduces a new enemy type called Eva Angels, and along with it comes a brand new Eva Killer ability. There is also a combo for this called You Will Find Happiness, which features Shinji and Cat and Kawaru and Cat. Plug Suit Shinji Black is a multi-hit tank that resists aliens and zombies. They have 76,500 effective HP. Their cooldown of 21.2 seconds renders their tanky abilities pretty useless. Kawaru and Cat deal massive damage against black enemies, but since they only deal 17,000 damage with a 24-second cooldown and no survivability, it's pretty hard to get value out of them. Giraffe Unit 01 and Unit 02 are just reskinned versions of Giraffe Cat, but with Survive, so little to no use. Gendo and Fuyutsuki Cats are a meat shield, and have good enough health to work in 4-star Stories of Legend. Rei, Asuka, Mari, and Kawaru Cats all have a specific target, deal massive damage and resist them, and are single target units. Rei targets angels, having an effective 48,000 HP and dealing 15,000 damage against them. Solid for a good chunk of the game, but once options like Mushroom and Bubble become available, their usage tends to fall off. Asuka targets Red, with 51,000 effective health and dealing an effective 20,000 damage. She faces much more competition as an anti-red unit, and most of her value comes in 4-star for tanking red enemies. Mari targets floating with 45.9k HP and dealing 10,000 damage. 4-star gives her some value, it can make for an excellent partner with Cameraman. Kaworu targets black enemies with 42,000 HP and dealing an effective 15,000 damage. The evolved form trades attack rate for range, but the first form is more than suitable, though they won't work all that too well due to single targeting. Reunion Low Ray is a rather powerful anti-angel, being strong against them, having a 50% chance to weaken for 8 seconds, and a 20% chance to dodge, on top of weaken immunity. She has 68,000 effective HP and deals an effective 30,000 damage against them. Eye Patch Lil Asuka is strong against red enemies, has a 40% chance to knock them back, and is slow immune. She's able to be solid against red enemies, but due to the nature of the trait having so many counters, it may be a tough sell to use her over other options. She has 73,000 effective HP and deals an effective 26,000 damage against red enemies. Plug Suit Mari is a fairly solid floating attacker who is also immune to freeze. She could be paired with the likes of Cameraman to help provide additional burst damage. She has 62,000 effective health and deals an effective 20,000 damage against floating. Captain Misato is a fairly solid alien crowd control unit with a 50% chance to slow them for 4.8 seconds, a 30% barrier breaker chance, and slow immunity, though she does face stiff competition with Seafarer and Kitty of Liberty. First Officer Ritsuko has a 50% chance to weaken aliens for 8 seconds. She's able to help the likes of Seafarer when it comes to ensuring they can get their freeze off. She also has weaken and warp immunity. Awaken Ayanami resists black enemies, has a 30% chance to weaken them, and is knockback immune. She has an effective 229,500 HP against black enemies. She is very much like Ro and Octopus in terms of tanking the respective traits, and she does a pretty good job at it. This is one of the 2 collabs in the game where there's just so many Ubers, they've been split into 2 different banners. The first one is just called Evangelion. Eva Unit 00 is a floating and angel tanker with the extremely rare wave blocker. While their tanking is fine, with 637,000 effective HP, the real value comes from being a ranged wave blocker, as they have enough range to outrange the major waivers in this game. Determined Unit 01 and Cat is strong against aliens and zombies, gets 150% stronger when at 50% health, can break barriers, and spawns a mini search between 400 to 700 range. They have 195,000 effective HP and deal 28,000 effective damage, or 70,000 when at half health. Their barrier breaker lets them be useful for starred aliens. Their mini surge is a little wonky, but can provide some bonus damage on further back targets. Unit 02, Code 77, is what you get if you turned Courier into an Uber Rare, dealing massive LD damage against red enemies and doubling damage at 33% health. They deal 149,000 effective damage against red enemies, nearly 300,000 at 33% HP with 44,000 effective DPS. Shinji Cat is essentially a weaker but still viable Cats in the Cradle who knocks back black and metal instead of floating an alien. Nerve Moon is not the greatest red or zombie slower, slowing for 4.4 seconds, but if you lack any other options, then they could be somewhat useful. Ava Unit 08 is an LD multi-hit anti-floating unit that can apply various status effects. While they only have a 20% chance for their knockback, freeze, or weaken to activate, if you don't really care what status effect they produce, the effective chance with all 3 multi-hits accounted for bumps the odds to a solid 86% chance for at least one of them to activate. But again, if you want a specific debuff, then the odds drop dramatically. Vanish Triple N Vunda is a zombie and angel nuker, dealing 122,000 damage against them with a solid 26,000 DPS and are slow immune. Their kit is simple, yet effective at what it does. Blue-Eyed Asuka is a clone of Kazli the Bane. Even if she has lower stats, more situational immunities to slow, freeze, and toxic, and a weaker curse time of 2.5 seconds, the fact is that she's still a Kazli the Bane clone, making her one of the strongest collab units in the game. She also comes packed with Colossus Slayer, giving her 87,000 effective health and dealing an effective 80,000 damage with her surge factored in. Those were all of the Ubers that were just featured in the first gacha. Evangelion Second Strike is a gacha set that contains the rest of the Ubers within the collab. Just like how Blue-Eyed Asuka was a clone of a Fest unit, Heavenly Herald Ray is a clone of Mitama the Oracle. Ray has an effective 127,000 HP, has a solid slow time of 2 seconds or 2.4 seconds with treasures, and has a 30% chance to spawn a surge between 250 to 850 range. However, she loses all of the immunities that Mitama has in exchange for surge immunity, giving Rei that little niche over Mitama. While she isn't as effective as Mitama, this doesn't discount her ability to keep an entire group of enemies stalled for a few seconds. The 4th Angel is able to knock back and deal massive damage against black enemies, with the 50% chance to spawn a level 3 mini wave with freeze immunity. They deal 59,000 effective damage against black enemies. While the damage is good enough to naturally knock back the likes of Gory Black and Shadowboxer K, it is still useful for their knockback ability against the likes of Bomba Black and Lenoir. General use is limited. The 6th Angel is an anti-floating nuker with an extremely wide area attack of 200 to 1500 range. They deal an effective 136,000 damage. Any floating enemy that survived is slowed for 6 seconds, and they have a level 3 surge. Depending on where the surge lands, it can maximize this unit's damage to 544,000, but the wide surge spawn area of 450 to 1250 can make it miss sometimes. They also have a 50% chance to dodge floating enemies in the event they get pushed. The 10th Angel is an Angel Nuker who freezes for 2.4 seconds and spawns a level 2 surge between 250 to 950 range. They deal an effective 75,000 damage, and if the surge is able to land in the right spot, they can deal 226,000 damage. The slow attack rate and wide surge spawn makes them very tricky to use in practice, however. The 9th Angel is an LD anti-alien nuker who also breaks barriers, can weaken for 6 seconds, and spawns a rather focused surge between 400 to 700 range. While their effective damage against aliens sits at 108,000, due to the focused nature of the surge, most of the time the max damage is 217,000 if they aren't knocked back by the initial hit. Last is Ava Unit 13, who has a multi-hit, strong against Aku, a 50% chance to spawn a mini surge between 400 to 700 range, and is surge immune. As an anti-Aku, they're okay, but their multi-hit can easily cause them to miss several hits if they successfully knock back an enemy. They have an effective 163,000 HP, and if all 3 hits land, deal an effective 36,700 damage. This collab had received 9 auxiliary points, with 2 of those already being mentioned. 7 auxiliary points are given due to the soundtracks added to the collab, and 1 last one is given to the Angels and Ava units having a unique death animation. Just as I had mentioned earlier, Ava Angels are another enemy type that was added, and there were 5 of these added. The first is Sechiel, an Ava Angel with high range to knock back your units, but most of the time it isn't all that big of a threat. In their strongest appearance, however, they can take quite a long time to kill due to having 5.4 million health and dealing 135,000 damage if you lack Ava killers. Next is everyone's favorite octahedron, Remiel. This thing deals a large amount of damage in a wide area and has base destroyer, so keeping them away from your base is #1 priority. At peak strength in the gauntlet, they have 4.5 million health and deal 675,000 damage, allowing them to nuke your base with 2.7 million damage backing it. Then there's Bardiel, an LD Ava Angel that will weaken any unit that gets stomped for 5 seconds. While it has a very small blind spot of 200, units like Bahamut can just slip by due to speed clipping. At their peak strength, they have 9 million health and deal 270,000 damage. Zeruel is the penultimate Ava Angel boss, who alone is extremely beefy and will nuke most units in one hit with a far-piercing Omni Strike. They're wave, knockback, freeze, slow, and weaken immune. At peak strength, they have 7.5 million health and deal 450,000 damage, so units like Jianshi, Boulder, and Doron are some of your only non-Ava killer options. Last and easily the most famous is Awaken Ava Unit 13. This absolute unit of an enemy has 4 million health and has a 100% chance to freeze units for 5 seconds, weaken units for 25 seconds, and knock back your units with a crazy Omni Strike of negative 3600 to 1200. They also double their already high 100,000 damage when at half health, and they come with wave, knockback, weaken, freeze, and slow immunities. While starred versions of the levels aren't a part of the formal ranking process, this particular enemy, specifically We'll Meet Again 3-star as of this video, is the very last stage to have ever been beaten no gacha, even after Heinous Row, and was first cleared by Game Changer, so shout out to them. Our last actual enemy is Ava Unit 13, the only non-Ava Angel enemy. This enemy is traitless and has a hard-hitting multi-hit that will consistently fire off mini-surges and will slow your units for 5 seconds. They're also wave, knockback, slow, freeze, weaken, and surge immune. The key to fighting this enemy is to time your units between their multi-hits, similar to the likes of Capicawano. The last enemy isn't really an enemy, but this is the Shinji Bench Base. This is notable as this is the only animated base enemy to have an actual trait, as they're a metal enemy. Also, the only unit you can use in your stage is the basic cat, and any other evolutions. While this is not part of the final score, I want to give special mention to Neon Genesis Neoncogalion, a catified version of the original Neon Genesis Evangelion opening made for this collab, and was even sung by Yoko Takahashi, the singer who sang the original Evangelion theme, and I highly recommend you check it out if you haven't already after this video. The second largest collab in the game is with Street Fighter, a fighting game. This collab is the collab with the most auxiliary points in the game, and the only one to score more than 10 points with adding 13 brand new music tracks to the game. Ryu Cat is a better Flower Cat, but loses all relevance once you get Bomber Cat. Chun-Li Cat only has value as a crit unit when you lack any other options, as their effective crit chance is 14% when accounting for their multi-hit. Akuma Lion, despite being a lion variant, has a slower attack rate due to their unique attack animation. They are strong against traitless and are immune to waves, but their effective stats of 17,000 HP, 1,275 damage, and a 17-second cooldown kill any sort of minuscule viability this unit could have had. Balrog Cat has an effective health stat of 24,000 health and 6.1k damage against black enemies, but their single target limits their usage greatly. Vega Cat is strong against angels with toxic immunity. They effectively have 29,000 HP and deal 15,000 damage against them, but their low stats mainly leave them as a niche option for Papu due to his toxic immunity. Saga Cat is strong against floating, with 28,000 HP and 2,200 damage and wave immunity, but their poor stats don't let them get anywhere. M Bison Cat has an effective 21,000 HP and deals an effective 10,000 damage against aliens, with a 20% chance to break barriers. M Bison Cat mainly gets value in Into the Future and some Cats of the Cosmos restriction stages. C Honda is an angel tanker with knockback and soul immunity. Despite having an effective health stat of 238,000, it's pretty difficult to get value out of them outside of pure angel stages, and even then they still face stiff competition with Ramen. Just like with Evangelion, this collab has so many Ubers that it's been split into two different banners. First, we will cover the red team. Kage is a pure generalist who has both a 20% Savage Blow chance and strengthens by 50% when at 40% HP. Landing a Savage Blow strengthen hit deals 36,000 damage. While their DPH is low, they have a solid DPS stat of 6.2k if we exclude the Savage Blow from the equation. Guile is a solid floating crowd controller, being able to slow and weaken them for 4 seconds, and they have an effective 272,000 HP against them, but they won't get much use outside of this. Blanca is an amazing alien rusher unit, dealing 102,000 damage against them with Barrier Breaker. Even if he only uses half of his knockbacks, that's still a very impressive 408,000 damage. Their Omni Strike allows him to snatch any alien enemy that's just outside his 150 standing range. E Honda is an Angel Rusher knockbacker, with an effective health stat of 637,000. However, his low damage stat doesn't allow them to get much value at all. Balrog, not Greater Balrog, Balrog targets only red, black, and zombie enemies with Z-Killer, but in exchange has a very solid 10,000 DPS and a very cheap cost of 2,190 to send out, so he's very strong in his specialized targeting. M Bison is strong against zombies, floating, and alien enemies, with a solid Omni Strike of negative 685 to 415 to snipe burrowed zombies, alongside Barrier Breaker, Z-Killer, and Warp Immunity. He has an effective 170,000 HP, and if all 3 of his multi-hits land, deals 60,000 damage. Last on the red team is Luke, who is like Mighty Lord Gao in many ways, but lacks wave immunity and can't crit, but has a 10% chance to pierce shields and a 5% chance to Savage Blow. Luke has an effective 136,000 HP or 170,000 post treasures and deals 28,000 effective damage or 33,000 effective damage. There are just as many Ubers featured in the blue team as there were in the red team. Chun-Li has a 40% chance to knock back red, black, and alien enemies. However, her true value comes from her raw DPS stat, having the highest out of any collab unit and the 3rd highest raw DPS out of any Uber in the game. She is very similar to Thunderjack in many ways, even sharing the exact same attack stat, so anywhere Thunderjack works, Chun-Li will work just as well. Just swap Angel and Zombie with red and black. Zangief is an alright zombie tanker, and with an Omni Strike of negative 840 to 210, it can allow him to snipe zombies that burrow behind him. However, his tanking comes from his raw HP stat and 20% chance to dodge. He is also slow and knockback immune. Dalzim is a multi-hit traitless weakener who weakens for 3 seconds. While he does target traitless, his value only really comes into play in stages with peon spam. Otherwise, Thaumaturge can do a better job at weakening due to Dalsim's somewhat poor weaken uptime. Ken is an okay red floating and angel unit, where he has an effective 204,000 HP, and if all 3 of his multi-hits land, deals 66,000 damage with knockback on the last hit. Though his rather poor standing range of 250 leaves him very susceptible to enemy attacks, even with his Omni Strike landing up to 350 range. Vega is an LD anti-metal unit, being able to freeze them for 3 seconds with a 30% chance to crit. However, outside his metal niche, Vega doesn't have the stats to do anything else. Saga is a floating nuker. Normally, he deals 71,000 damage against them, but when he's below half health, he deals 107,000 damage against floating enemies. Solid floating nuker, though his value is a lot less when outside of this context. Last is Sakura, who deals massive damage against all traded enemies, and if all 3 of her multi-hits land, she'll deal 68,000 damage, or 91,000 damage post-treasures. Her downside is a short 250 standing range, which though in turn has an Omni Strike that goes up to 350 range. The last unit in this collab is the only other legend rare unit, this being Akuma. While Akuma doesn't have the best defense, his ability to nuke traitless enemies is stellar. If all of his hits land, he deals an impressive 128,000 damage against them with 25k DPS. His freeze immunity is even helpful for Henry. All of the Street Fighters are enemies as well as a car special base. Ryu is a rather hard-hitting Omni Strike enemy. Chun-Li has rapid attacks that will constantly knock back your units. Zangief is a bulky red enemy with multi-hit and is immune to weaken, freeze, slow, and knockback. Guile is a multi-hit enemy that will slow your units for 4 seconds on his second hit. Dalsim is a multi-hit enemy that will weaken units for 3.33 seconds, and with multi-hit makes this effectively a perma-weaken. Blanca is a speedy piercer enemy, and with 160 knockbacks, will strike again even after the lightest graze. Ken is a red enemy who packs quite a punch and will knock back your units on the third hit. E Honda is a bulky enemy that will knock back your units that are too close to him. Vega is an LD enemy who will freeze any unit that gets caught in his claws for 3 seconds. Balrog punches hard, but he's a single target enemy, so he can easily be stalled. Saga doesn't deal the highest damage, but is packed with a level 3 wave and will double his damage at half health. M. Bison has a slight Omni Strike and low raw attack power, but is supplemented by his toxic ability, dealing 20% of a unit's max health for any unit caught in his spin. Sakura is a piercing enemy who doubles damage at half health, boosting to 36,000 damage. Luke has a somewhat of a mean punch, even with the 20% savage blow backing it, but it isn't enough to where you can push on his own. The last enemy is Akuma, a black enemy with a far-reaching Omni Strike that will chunk most units' health that are caught within its grasp. And now for the largest collab in the entire game. This title goes to Mercstoria. This collab surprisingly doesn't have any auxiliary points, but the sheer amount of enemies and units, along with almost a dozen true forms and even several talentable units, makes this collab the largest in the game's history. Healer Cat CC is perhaps one of this game's most famous collab units due to their ability to cheese several difficult stages, from the tower bosses, Cappy Jr., Pugsley, and even Awaken Bahamut's talent stage, to name a few examples. Their low range would normally be a weakness, but instead it becomes a strength, and with the right setup, can turn an absurdly difficult boss into nothing more than a punching bag due to their excellent freeze. Merc is a rusher crit unit with a 20% chance to do so, allowing her to possibly snipe the likes of Metal Doge, Metal Hippo, and Metal One Horn, though her niche gets replaced by Cat Researcher, who, despite having a 6% crit chance, has a much faster attack rate and an astounding 400 range. TT is a multi-hit slower, being able to slow for 8.4 seconds, but with a 20% chance to do so. Her single target and a long cooldown make it difficult for her to stand out when compared to other options. Most of the rare gacha units are not good. Celeste is just the worst Witch Cat, seeing as Witch Cat has both a true form and talents that completely outshine her. Olga is like Pirate Cat, but once again, Pirate has a true form and talents that completely outshine her. Norn is a worse off version of Face Cat, and even then, single target makes crowd control units like Thaumaturge more appealing. Yoichi's 20% chance to slow black enemies just makes them a worse rodeo cat thanks to that 1100 cost, even with that 340 range. Serum is like Tin Cat, but with worse range. Last is Fu, which is just Flower Cat again, but yet again, Bomber Cat renders their niche to not be worth it. The only rare unit that's solid is Nono, who's an extremely solid anti-black meat shield, like Gao Gao. They have an effective 63,000 HP against them, with a 50% chance to survive and curse immunity. While Gao Gao may be the tankier of the two, They both work extremely well with each other due to Nono having 190 range compared to Gao Gao's 110, allowing her to work as a second layer of defense. Aura has a 40% chance to knock back black enemies. Sadly, this doesn't do much, especially when a unit like Pizza exists, who, due to sheer damage, can effectively do the same thing. Ray is an okay black slower, having a 40% chance to slow them for 4.8 seconds, giving over 200% uptime, but their range of 194 only makes her helpful against the likes of Gory Black and Shadowboxer K. Eloise has a 20% chance to knock back angels, which isn't all that strong, only really having a niche as a Saint Dober knockbacker to allow Sanzo or any of your other anti-angels to keep attacking them. Citra Lee has a 30% chance to knockback and slow for 3.6 seconds against red and black enemies. While the red crowd control is solid, their niche as an anti-black unit is a lot more shaky once again due to better crowd control options. Artist Orthos has a 30% chance to knock back floating enemies, though his appeal comes from his talents that turn him into a fairly competent generalist super rare with 4.8k DPS with attack and mini surge talents. If you decide to use an S rank attack orb, you can boost his DPS to 5800 against a specific trait due to the mini surge. Wyvern is a solid anti-black attacker who could supplement Pizza rather well, dealing 107,000 damage against them, and providing occasional CC with a 50% chance to weaken for 3.6 seconds. They also have Colossus Slayer, though this is only helpful for Legrim. In turn, Wyvern can deal 171,000 damage against the elephant with 111,000 effective health. Mystica is strong against black and Aku enemies, having 61,000 or 76,000 effective health and dealing 48,000 or 58,000 effective damage while slowing for 5 or 6 seconds. Her main appeal is having 690 range, allowing her to stay safe from most threats and provide additional support. Her low raw stats do kinda shoot her in the foot, but if other options are lacking, then she could work. Her only real worthwhile talent is Surge Immunity to help combat Aku Surge spam. Juvens is an amazing angel tanker with both resist and a 20% chance to dodge angels. His effective health goes to 663,000 health. His unnaturally fast cooldown of 37 seconds allows him to be stacked extremely quickly, and in angel stages allows him to act as a second line of defense with Ramen with an impressive 10,000 DPS. Then we have Cornelia. Despite being an Uber, she has the qualities of a super rare, having a 30% chance to freeze black and red enemies for 4.8 seconds, and having rather poor generalist stats. Hirsch is only good to help cover gaps in your anti-metal defenses, as she has a 40% chance to crit and resist metals, giving her 212,000 effective health. None of her talents are really worth acquiring due to her extremely niche usage. MattShea is a solid anti-floating Uber, with an effective 159,000 health and dealing 87,000 damage while freezing for 4.8 seconds. The value of her talents are dependent on where you are in Uncanny Legends. If you lack relic specialists, then relic targeting and curse immunity are solid investments. She has an effective 127,500 HP and deals an effective 72,000 damage against relic enemies. Todameki is an alright alien and zombie slower, having a 50% chance to do so for 4.8 seconds. It packs a surprising punch with 33,000 damage for a crowd control unit. While other options are preferable, she's still usable. Eyewalt is a mid-range waver with guaranteed survive, a 100% chance to summon a level 2 wave, a 50% chance to deliver a savage blow, and is also wave immune himself. Eyewalt's damage output is fairly strong, dealing 51,000 damage, where he effectively has 172 extra piercing range, dealing 25,000 damage. Savage Blow obviously will triple this damage, and while the chance is somewhat low at 15%, this could be boosted further to 25% via talents. His knockback immunity is a bit shaky, but weakened immunity allows Eyewaltz to not have his attacks get dampened, allowing for powerful, consistent hits. Last is Taitenki, who has a rather strange kit. She is strong against Alien and Aku, effectively giving her 68,000 or 85,000 effective HP and dealing 23,000 effective damage or 28,000 effective damage. She also has a 24% chance to break barriers and pierce shields, doubles her damage output at 50% health, and is immune to surges. Taitenki's low breaking odds make her rather unreliable in this front, and her damage only becomes respectable when she's already below half health. While Surge Immunity helps her with her Aku matchup, the lack of actual stats and poor breaking chances make her rather wonky to use. This collab has the most amount of enemies out of any collab, having an astounding 20 different enemies featured. Celeste, Nono, and Norn are all weak melee enemies. Olga and Yoichi have some range to them, but aren't all too threatening. Serum is fast and attacks often, but can be shut down by anti-floating units. Same case goes to Fu, but she has a 20% chance to freeze your units for 3 seconds. Aura has health and a 100% chance to knock back your units, but doesn't hit all too hard. Ray is a melee speedster who has bulk and health, but is also a floating enemy. Wyvern is a backline nuker, so while they don't attack often, they will nuke quite a few units that get too close to them. Healer is a ranged attacker who has a 10% chance to crit your units. Being subjected to the forces of catification, Healer Cat gains some range and damage and becomes way bulkier, as well as now having a 50% chance to freeze your units for a second. Hirsch is a high-range, single-target nuker designed to poke one unit at a time, especially with a 40% chance to crit. Cornelia is a simple range floating attacker. Alois is a mid-range attacker with 270 range. Merc and Cat are speedy, come in groups, and have a 5% chance to crit your units. TT Cat is a high-range enemy with multi-hit and has a 50% chance to slow your units for 7 seconds, keeping them away from her for a long while. Orthos is a speedy enemy, but his overall damage isn't the highest, even at his strongest showings. MattShea is a high-range floating attacker, but doesn't have the strongest offense, especially due to her long attack frequency. The last enemy of the collab is Totomeki, a floating enemy who has a 50% chance to slow your units for 4 seconds. And with that, this is the final ranking of every single collab that had ran in the Burgle Cats. I suppose I should recap the placements one last time. Numbers 58, 57, and 56 are all tied between the Honey Toast Cafe Akihabara collabs, Cuckoo Crew 12, and Tutorial, all with a singular point. Number 55 is with the Tokyo Sky Tree with 1.75 points. Number 54 is with Y Mobile with 2.5 points. Numbers 53 and 52 are the MattShea Island Tour and Catbusters with 2.75 points. Numbers 51, 50, and 49 are a three-way tie between Dot Heroes, Nazusagi, and PPAP with 3.25 points. Number 48 is with Mentori, having 3.5 points. Numbers 47 and 46 are a two-way tie between Betakuma and Chocolate, having 3.75 points. Numbers 45 and 44 are a two-way tie with the JSDF and Godzilla, both having 4 points. Numbers 43, 42, 41, and 40 are a four-way tie with Hiroshi Mihara, Dragon League, Hikakin, and Final Boss Strikes with 4.75 points. Number 39 is with Nissan UFO with 5.5 points. Numbers 38 and 37 are a two-way tie with Neo Mushroom Garden and Yakuza Apocalypse with 5.75 points. Numbers 36 and 35 are a two-way tie with the Gyeoshan Rapid Transit Line and Google Android, both having 6.5 points. Number 34 is with Lion Pokopong with 7.5 points. Number 33 is with the KRT Girls, having 8.5 points. Numbers 32 and 31 are a two-way tie with Gigigi no Kitaru and Crash Fever with 9.75 points. Number 30 is with Shin Japan Heroes Universe with 10.25 points. Number 29 is with Monster Hunter with 10.5 points. Number 28 is with Get On Kyoto Subway with 11 points. Number 27 is with the Japan Racing Association with 11.25 points. Number 26 is with Chaparral Planet with 11.5 points. Number 25 is with Nibaru-kun and Nyanpazuru with 11.75 points. Numbers 24 and 23 are with Tower of Saviors and Million Arthur X Dragon Poker with 12 points. Number 22 is with Yorojasil with 12.25 points. Number 21 is with Kishidan at 12.5 points. Numbers 20 and 19 are with World Trigger and River City with 12.75 points. 18 is with Gudetama having 16.25 points. Number 17 is with Mola Mola having 16.75 points. Number 16 is with Rurouni Kenshin with 17.25 points. Number 15 is with Sonic the Hedgehog having 19.75 points. Numbers 14 and 13 are with Baki Hanma and Ranma Half, both scoring 21.25 points. Number 12 is with Metal Slug with 27.5 points. Number 11 is with Power Pro Baseball at 30.25 points. Number 10 is with Fate Stay Night with 35 points. Number 9 is with Hatsune Miku at 36.5 points. Numbers 8 and 7 are with Annihilated City and Bikuramin, both having 37.25 points. Number 6 is Madoka Magica with 39 points. Number 5 is Castle and Dragon with 41.75 points. Number 4 is Princess Punt with 42.5 points. Number 3 is with Neon Genesis Evangelion with 56.5 points. Number 2 is with Street Fighter with 63.5 points. Finally, at number 1 is with Merc Storia at 65 points. I want to thank you for watching this exhaustive look at all the collabs and ranking them based on the scale these collabs go to. This has easily been the longest video project that I've done, but if you enjoyed looking at all the collabs this game has had to offer, then be sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy Burgle Cats content, and comment down below your favorite collab, or even your least favorite collab. I'd be interested to hear what they are. Also, shout out to the following channel members: Dr. Deadly, Gamet, Ian Dean, Eribarel, Ninja Stars, Tentacle Gaming, Virus El Perro, Just a Shark, Potato King, Gross Cat the Best, and Chorus for being silver members or higher. If you want to receive a shout out like these channel members here, then become a silver member or higher today. Becoming a channel member supports what I do in a way that helps keep the lights on, and channel members receive an exclusive role on my Discord server, for which you can find a link to in the description down below. Anyways, I hope you have a wonderful day.